Before we jump in, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. It seriously helps the channel grow. All right, let's get started. When the future collapses and her crew lies broken, Luffy is offered an impossible bargain. Give up everything she is and be sent back in time for one last chance. Reborn as her past self, Luffy carries the weight of loss, regret, and love she refuses to lose again. Every smile hides fear, every reckless charge is calculated, and every choice risks unraveling fate itself. As she fights to save her Nakama before tragedy strikes, the price of changing destiny grows heavier, and the question becomes whether saving them is worth losing herself. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Once in a Lifetime by AlcoholicIntrovert. Respect to author.
Chapter 8, A Familiar Flame. Ace, even though I'm so worthless. Ace, Ace, even though I carry the blood of a demon in me. Ace, 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 thank you for loving me. Ace, Ace, Ace. Everything rushed at her, washing over her in powerful waves and pulling her under. She couldn't move, she couldn't breathe, she couldn't think. She was simply overwhelmed as everything invaded her mind, her thoughts, her being. The memories, the pain, the blood, oh good God, the blood. Ace's blood, her blood, the blood of those that had fallen. The crimson was on her hands, seeping into her skin and tainting her sight. Everything was vivid and red, the smell of burning flesh filling her nostrils and sending her over the edge. A violent tremor ripped through her body, but something constrained her. She thrashed wildly against this confinement, but it was no use. Whatever held her held fast. Her eyes cracked open, instantly assaulted by the awful crimson shade, and after blinking rapidly, trying to escape it, a flash of green hair. She instantly closed her eyes, her body relaxing and ending the struggle. When had she ended up in Zoro's arms? She tried to recall, but her mind refused to focus on anything else but blood and death and life. And life. Ace was alive. Ace was here, Ace could be saved. Another spasm ran through her, and she was pretty sure she heard a yell, but she couldn't tell who it belonged to. Maybe it was her. God, she hated this. She needed to pull herself together, and she needed to do it now. Her crew did not need a captain that continued to fall into these odd fits. They did not need a weak captain that caved to painful memories. They needed someone who was strong and trustworthy and capable. Someone that was reliable, and someone that could protect them. Luffy, calm down. Finally, Zoro's voice reached her and his voice broke through the pool she found herself drowning in, pulling her to the surface. His voice was calm, demanding, but contained a hint of worry. Breathe, Luffy. Luffy sucked in a breath, filling her oxygen-lacking lungs, coming back to her senses. She blinked rapidly and Zoro's face swam into view. His eyes were narrowed in suspicion and concern and she closed her eyes so that she would not have to see it as she sucked in a few breaths. When she finally opened her eyes once more, a pillar of smoke and fire filled the air and her eyes widened. She needed to get back, she needed to save Ace. No, Ace was fine. He could handle himself, at least for now. Right now, above all else, she needed to calm down and she needed to control herself. Until then, she was useless to everyone. Calming down took a few minutes of listening to Zoro's heavy breathing and the sound of her Nakama's frantic footsteps across the hot sand, but finally her own breathing evened out. Her heart still beat quickly and loudly, echoing in her ears, but she could see and she could think. As if knowing she was fine, Zoro finally put her down. They were already at the ship, and his concerned eyes followed her as she shakily lifted herself up. She did so without looking at his face, afraid for the disappointment she would surely find there. Instead, she ducked her head and avoided eye contact. She didn't look up as they began to pile away the supplies, but she could feel their eyes on her. Disappointed. They would be disappointed in their captain's sudden weakness, she was sure. Luffy, are you okay? Chopper was in front of her, sounding almost frantic with worry. Oh God, you need a checkup. You could have heat fever or… What the hell was that back there? Zoro's voice echoed from beside her, cutting the reindeer off. To most it would have sounded angry, but the crew could hear the concern in the swordsman's voice. Hey, leave her alone, Marimo, Sanji snapped at the man, stepping forward despite the glares set on him. Luffy-chan, are you okay? She finally looked up at them, forcing a bright smile. They were not fooled. Don't worry about me, guys. We need to get out of here though. Luffy, Nami began, but was cut off by Luffy's look, surprisingly strict. It's probably just heat fever like Chopper said. Heat fever or something, I'll be fine, she lied. Right now, focus on getting out of here. Captain's orders. The crew reluctantly did as they were told, though she could feel their concerned gazes. Her bright smile remained, though it was clearly faked. The nightmares caused similar actions in their captain, but they had never seen it this bad before. She was shaking, pale, and her sweat-drenched skin glistened under the blinding sun. Her clearly forced smile seemed to slip away as she turned away from the crew. Everyone had their weak moments, but they would admit it was just so odd to see Luffy like this. Luffy was strong, she would recover and keep moving, they knew, but it was still scary to see. And beyond that, if they were honest, the most frightening thing was the fact that their bluntly obvious captain was trying to lie to them. Luffy hadn't moved since the ship set sail. Instead, her eyes were set on Nanohana, or more specifically, the place that they had left the mystery man. The smoke had long disappeared from the sky, but the devil fruit user had yet to appear. The crew was growing increasingly worried. With so many unanswered questions and a seemingly unresponsive captain, they weren't exactly sure what to do. What had happened earlier? Some form of panic attack. Surely it was that man, but what was it about him that had set their captain off? Nami finally decided to ask the question they had all been wondering the answer to, but were too scared then to ask. Luffy, who was that guy? Luffy didn't answer, or even indicated that she may have heard the question. She just kept staring at the island. Surprisingly, it was Zoro who answered Nami. Like I said before, as a former bounty hunter I'd be crazy to not recognize him. That mark tattooed on his back was the symbol of the Whitebeard Pirates. That was Portgas D. Ace, commander of the 2nd Division of the Whitebeard Pirates. He's strong. Strong enough to have a bounty of 550 million berry. The crew, with the exception of Sanji, whose face mirrored their shock, and Luffy, shrieked. They immediately began to panic with this newfound information. 550 million. That's over 14 times Luffy's bounty. Nami yelled, looking very upset. A bounty that large was never a good sign. Let alone if that person was after their captain. How strong does someone have to be to get a bounty like that? They don't let just anyone become 2nd Division commander of the White. Zoro was cut off by Usopp's alarmed reply. Who cares? I hope we never have to find out. He'd demolish us. Zoro cast an annoyed look at the clearly terrified man, before looking back at Luffy thoughtfully. What I want to know is what he's doing here, why he seems to know Luffy, and what he did to Luffy to make her react like that. She had her arms wrapped around herself, as if she were cold and trying to keep warm. She had a distant look in her eyes, now unfocused as they lost sight of the city going around a corner. He reached out as if to grasp her shoulder, attempt to break her out of this, but instead spun around at a shout. Are those billions ships? Vivi's gasp sent the crew, save Luffy and Zoro, scattering for the other side of the ship, looking out at the ocean in horror. Well, they were, Sanji commented, his voice betraying his shock. If the burning masts are anything to go off of. And indeed, before them, what may have been a fleet of billions ships, had been reduced to nothing more than flaming debris and smoking devastation. There was no doubt in anyone's mind, as they heard the burning wood hiss as it began to sink in the water, to who had done this damage. My guess is that Portgas isn't too far from here, Zoro commented dryly. So that's the power of Fire Fist Ace. Usopp breathed out, his eyes wide in fear. He destroyed them, roasted them. The crew was sent scuttling around once more at the sound of swords unsheathing, and the voice that followed. Yes, actually. Partially thanks to the flame fruit though. Crouching on the railing of their ship, Portgas D. Ace grinned down at the crew. He was directly in front of Luffy, the only thing really dividing them being two swords. Despite being terrified, the others were quick to follow suit and trained their separate weapons on the pirate. Ace's smile dropped away, slowly looking from the crew, to their weapons, then back to Luffy. When he caught sight of her, still pale and shaking, he hopped down from the railing and moved forward. He didn't get too far, the two swords meeting him halfway. What do you want here? Zoro questioned, his voice low, dangerous and threatening. His glare was just as threatening as the swords he held carefully. At long last, Luffy moved, stepping forward as if to stop Zoro. At the same time, she was unsure what exactly to say. She was clearly afraid of something, they only wished they knew what. Ace recognized her, that much was obvious. He was different too, the way he looked at her. There was just something off. What reason was he here? To see his little bro sister. Maybe, just maybe, he remembered everything that had happened, but she hoped this was not the case. After all, what would he say if he did? What would he do? She winced at the very idea. Ace smirked, but his answer was directed towards Luffy. Did you think you could get away from me, Luffy? With that being said, the swords were pressed against his chest, ready to be plunged into his skin at any given moment, should their master require it. Luffy's eyes had widened, her breath hitching, and he had reacted to her reaction. The last thing they needed was her going into another attack. Not with a Whitebeard pirate on board. She hadn't dwelled on the possibilities. She did not want to know what Ace would do upon seeing her, how he would react. Part of her hoped that it would be the same. That they would have the same bond as when they were both men. Even him not knowing her. Or not liking her because she was a girl now. Not once did it cross her mind that perhaps he hated her, or that they might be enemies. He could be hunting her for all she knew. She knew she wouldn't be able to handle something like that.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Ace, she breathed, watching him engaging his reaction. His smirk grew, and then she saw it. The teasing twinkle in his eyes, and under it, a certain protectiveness that was different from what she had seen before. He glanced at her nakama, and then back at her. He was playing with her. He was testing them, seeing if they could take care of his troublesome kid sister. But he was still Ace. Her Ace. She wanted to be angry, for pulling such a mean prank on her, but the relief overwhelmed all other emotions. Her face split into a grin. A real grin that seemed brighter than anything else her crew had seen before. It was as if 1,000 weights had been lifted off of her abused and scarred shoulders, and it was thanks to the man they were about to attack. Zoro slowly shifted his treasure swords away from Ace's body, but his grip did not lessen and they were not lowered too much. Just in case anything should happen. The crew followed his lead, chosen weapons falling to their sides. You've got a good crew here, Lu. Luffy didn't waste another second, launching herself forward. She was hugging him, her rubbery arms wound tightly around her brother. She could feel him hugging her back, his sorely missed warmth envelope her comfortingly. She could practically feel his heartbeat, and it reassured her above all else that this was real, this was actually happening. It wasn't a dream. Yeah, I've missed you too. It's been a while. His grip tightened, and he was chuckling at her actions. She couldn't hold it back anymore, hearing him again, feeling him again. It was too much her unexplainably sensitive emotions. She started crying, tears pouring freely down her face. She didn't care right now if her crew saw her like this because she finally had her brother back after so many years of him being dead. She distantly heard her crew's intakes of breath, half relief and half awe, at seeing her break down, but it didn't matter. All of her attention was focused on Ace, who was now pulling out of the hug. She didn't look up, so her put his hand under her chin and gently forced her to look at him. Lu, what's going on? Is everything okay? Concern and protectiveness laced his voice in a way she had never heard before, and his eyes searched hers for something that might give away what was wrong. She only shook her head, wiped away the tears and smiled at her brother. He grinned teasingly back. Geez, Luffy, I didn't think you would miss me so much you would cry. You haven't changed at all. He laughed again at the expression she made, before kissing her forehead and stepping away from her. The result was instantaneous. Angry and defensive, and maybe slightly jealous, Sanji and Zoro scowled at the action, made by the man that was suddenly threatening in a whole new way. Oi, keep your hands off of her. Why are you here? How do you know Luffy-chan? Sanji protested as Zoro glared darkly at Ace. The question finally dragged his attention away from his adorable baby sister, to whom seemed to be her nakama. They all looked rather shocked, a few angry, and a few more protective. All of them waited on the answers, still unsure of what was going on. My apologies, he said, bowing politely to the Straw Hat crew. My name is Portgas D. Ace, thank you for taking care of my little sister. I know she can be quite the handful sometimes. For an almost humorous period of time, it was completely silent with the exception of the waves lapping against the hull of the ship. Sister. Everyone turned to look at Luffy incredulity. She was no longer crying and now smiling happily, still standing close to Ace. Luffy, do you mean to tell us that the Fire Fist Ace is your older brother? Nami screeched at the young captain. Luffy only nodded enthusiastically in response. Beside her, Ace smirked. Luffy, you didn't tell them anything, did you? He sighed, exasperated. No wonder they were about to kill me. Luffy shrugged. I forgot, I guess. Ace rolled his eyes. He wasn't even surprised. It was just like his little sister. Yeah, that sounds like you. Hey, I was wondering, how about you join the Whitebeard Pirates? It'll be fun. No thanks. Her reply was straight out and flat, no hesitation. Ace laughed, having expected this answer. I thought that's what you would say. But Whitebeard is the greatest pirate I've ever met, Ace said, his voice becoming slightly serious. I'm going to make him Pirate King, Luffy. Sorry, Lu. Luffy just half smiled at Ace. She knew her dream was impossible now, with her deal with Ayum. But it didn't matter, she had a different goal now anyway. This didn't stop her next words though. It's just one more person for me to fight. Some of the members of her crew almost started crying right then and there. She shouldn't be able to so casually about fighting Whitebeard. You know, you're not exactly what I expected, Sanji said, more relaxed now that he knew the kiss had been nothing more than sibling affections. He pulled out a cigarette and reached for a lighter. Why don't you come on in? I'll make tea. No, but thank you. I don't want to impose, he said with an easy smile and another small bow. He lit Sanji's cigarette before the cook had found his lighter and laughed at the look he got in return. So what are you doing here anyway? Luffy asked, even though she knew and hated the reply she would get. The rest of the crew, however, looked up, interested in the answer. They were still hesitant around the flame fruit user, despite him being their captain's sister, and had been unsure about asking him the question. I take it you didn't get my message I left for you on drum? Ace asked, looking faintly annoyed as his sister shook her head. No. He sighed. I'm chasing someone. He paused, taking a drink and watching the crew's expressions, a pirate named Blackbeard. Passing unnoticed by her crew, Luffy's fist clenched around her drink. Hate flashed through her expression, but no one seemed to notice and she quickly covered it with a somber expression. Blackbeard, Usopp repeated, feeling as though he had heard the name before somewhere. Hey, I've heard of him, Vivi spoke, hesitantly at first, before nodding her head, remembering where she had heard the name. Yeah, he's the one that attacked Drum Kingdom. He's the one who attacked Drum. Chopper looked panicked at this. Why are you chasing him, Ace? Blackbeard used to be a member of the Whitebeard Pirates' 2nd Division, you see, Ace began, his voice relatively calm. He was one of my subordinated, but he committed the most unforgivable sin a pirate ever could. He killed one of his fellow crew members and jumped ship. As commander of his division, it is my responsibility to take care of him. So that's why you're after him. The long-nosed sniper exclaimed. But that doesn't quite explain why you're here. Ace chuckled good-naturedly. I came here because I'd heard that Blackbeard was seen in Alabasta in a place called Yuba. I'm heading there soon. Ace took another drink, the crew seemingly pleased with the answer. I could never pass up seeing my lil sister though. Luffy, who had been looking upset only moments prior, proceeded to beam at Ace. Isn't Yuba our destination too? Nami questioned, turning to Vivi for the answer. Yes, it is. Vivi confirmed, looking mildly shocked that they were heading in the same direction, and scared at the idea that such a dangerous man was in her country. As if crocodile wasn't enough. She pushed these thoughts out of her head, and pulled out a map. She opened her mouth to explain where they were headed, but was cut off by the energetic captain. Ace, come with us, Luffy said excitedly, attaching herself to Ace's arm before he could say anything. He laughed at her antics. You have to. I don't see any problem with it, he said, and her eyes brightened. She broke away from him to fetch more drinks to celebrate, allowing Ace to turn back to Vivi and the map. I'm sorry, you were saying. Wiping the slightly irritated look from her face, she pointed at the map. Like I was trying to say, we just entered the Sandora River. We'll take it up to Arumalu where we will dock and proceed on foot until we reach Yuba. Right, she indicated to a small dot on the map. Here, that's where the leader of the rebel army is, and that is where we are going. Ace nodded as Luffy was returning with the drinks, Sanji at her side. Sounds like a plan. What's a plan? Sanji, who had been preparing the supplies they would need, questioned them as he handed out drinks. Ace decided to join us, per Luffy's request, Nami explained. We'll be docking in a bit, and heading to Yuba from there. Sanji's reply was instantaneous. Oh Nami Swan, Vivi Kwan, Luffy Kwan, I'll follow you anywhere, just tell me where to go. Hopefully it's off a cliff. What did you say, Marimo? Knock it off you two, we have a guest on board. The fight was over as soon as it started, Nami's fists colliding with the back of their heads and sending them into silence. Sorry about that, Ace. Ace just grinned, looking at the men who now rubbed the back of their heads with amusement. Not at all. We're all really happy to have you aboard. With you here, this'll be a walk in the park. Usopp laughed, seemingly fearless now that they had such a powerful guy traveling with them, even if it was only for the time being. Luffy laughed, holding up her recently refilled drink. It was obvious how happy she was from the grin that stretched across her face. This'll be fun. To Ace. Even the slightly distracted Vivi joined in as they clanked their glasses together. Cheers. They had nearly reached where they would be docking. Only a while ago, after the commotion about Ace temporarily died down, Vivi had asked for them to drop anchor for a moment so that she could send a message to her father. Now they were safely back on track, but a semi-confused Ace had finally asked what exactly they were planning. Nami and Vivi had explained it their best of their ability, but it was difficult with the Straw Hat Captain feeling the need to put in her 2 cents. When they finished explaining, Ace looked rather uneasy with the new information. He leant back against the railing, a thoughtful look on his face. Luffy looked up at him from her spot on the deck, where she had been banished so that the other girls could properly explain. Well, I did know that Crocodile was here in Alabasta, but to try and steal the kingdom. He shook his head, knowing something was just off about the whole situation. It just sounds like a bad joke. For a pirate to simply drop anchor in one spot and settle down. Something isn't right. What you mean, Ace? Usopp said, joining into the conversation now that the briefing was over. Doesn't it sound a bit funny to you? Crocodile trying to claim the throne doesn't make any sense, Ace explained calmly, calculatingly. Maybe there is another side to this takeover thing. Zoro, who had appeared to be sleeping, cracked open an eye to stare at his captain's big brother. This last comment had sparked his interest. Another side. An ulterior motive. Exactly, Ace said grinning. Luffy, who had been ignoring most of the conversation after having been told off, bolted up at this, looking at Ace with awe and shock. It was this, and the excited tone in her voice that caught their attention. Ace, do you really know about the pwned life?
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Ace was taken aback by her sudden enthusiasm, though his face was puzzled. Pwn what now? The Pwngal, she frowned, shaking her head. Never mind actually. No, what are you talking about? It's nothing. Never mind, I said nothing, the girl said, turning her eyes away and whistling to herself. No matter, she knew she could not lie and it didn't work on Ace. Thankfully, he did let it slide after shooting her a look that clearly shouted, "Are you kidding me?" It was easy to chalk it up as Luffy simply being Luffy. With a glance at his sister, who was continuing to play innocent, and frowned. Luffy was still the girl he left behind years ago in many ways, but all the same, he could tell something had changed. Something serious. He could see it in her actions, her eyes and her body. The way she tensed around her nakama occasionally, or how she seemed much more clingy. She seemed to grasp any opportunity to latch herself onto her nakama or him. Then there was the way she would look over and be shocked to see him standing there. This, he figured, was due to how long it had been since he saw her, but it didn't explain the other things. Something had happened, and he knew he had to find out. Oh, we're finally here, Luffy gasped excitedly, Gum rocketing herself to the figurehead of the ship. She gazed out at the coast, to where they would start their journey by foot. Wow, Chopper said, lifting himself up onto the railing and gazing out at the scorching desert. Naively, he asked, how hot is it supposed to get? Over 40 degrees in the daytime, Nami answered, almost sounding a little apologetic. Even she knew this trek was going to be awful for the poor reindeer. Chopper flailed wildly, losing his grip on the railing and falling onto the deck. He recovered seconds later, jumping to his feet and scanning Nami's face. To his displeasure, the navigator seemed that she was not playing a joke. What? You have to be kidding. If you are to survive in the desert, you will need to wear these. Elsewhere on the deck, Vivi had hauled the captain down from her position on the figurehead and given her a bundle of clothes. Thanks, Vivi, Luffy explained, quickly pulling the fabric over her head. She was torn between upset and relieved that she had to cover them further than she already had. Knowing that she would be meeting Ace, she had put on a vest that had covered them until now, but it was getting annoying to have to check to make sure they were covered every few seconds. But this would make it a lot easier. Somewhere behind them, they could hear Sanji mourning the loss of the sight of the now covered skin. He was smart enough to not include Luffy in his moping, seeing as her possibly overprotective brother was on board. It didn't stop him from rolling around on the ground crying like a child who had been told no. Arrow Cook, get your shit together and help out with supplies, Zoro muttered, walking past the man who did not so much as move, and only continued pouting. Zoro looked like he might add something, but Usopp quickly hurried to gather the supplies, eager to prevent a fight. Yuba, here we come, Luffy cheered childishly from the front of the ship. She was eager to kick Crocodile's ass, even though she knew she would have to hold back a little. After all, he did come to his senses and help out somewhat at Impel Down. She just needed to knock a bit of sense into him. Zoro gave a small smile at his captain's enthusiasm, before going to lift the anchor. Just as he was about to drop it, he noticed shadows moving about beneath the surface of the water. What the hell, was all that he managed before a small, strange creature emerged from the water. It looked almost like a seal, but with a turtle shell. It was followed by a flock of identical creatures. Turtles. No. Kung Fu dugongs. Vivi gasped, though no one understood why she looked so horrified by the tiny, seemingly harmless creatures. That was, until who seemed to be the chief dugong began to talk, and Chopper translated it. If you want to come to shore you'll have to beat me first, but I doubt that will happen. If you're too afraid, you can go dock on the other shore, you cowards. Is what he says, Chopper repeated, before looking up at Nami to see what they would do next. No one calls me a coward and gets away with it. Here comes the pain. Unfortunately, before anyone could come to a rational decision, Usopp had heaved himself over the railing. Whether he was still overconfident from having Ace with them, or he was simply being Usopp, they didn't know. Wait, Usopp. Vivi gasped out, but her warning had come too late, and Usopp lay on the ground, beaten to a pulp. Kung Fu dugongs are insanely strong. Nay, I won. Luffy's voice drifted up to them from below, where she stood over a defeated dugong. She was grinning ear to ear, her hands thrown up in victory. Luffy, that's just as bad, Vivi shouted at the oblivious captain, bringing her hands up and rubbing her temples. Why was she putting her faith in such reckless people? With a sigh, she saw that the dugong had risen to its feet, and was now staring at Luffy with awe and admiration in its gaze. The captain didn't even seem to have heard her, too engrossed in the animal that now bowed to her. It's one of their rules. If they lose a kung fu match, they become the winner's pupil. It was obvious that this explanation had gone over the captain's head as well, though the crew obviously understood how bad this could be for them all. Zoro was staring at Luffy, a mixture of annoyance and amusement on his face. It was just like his captain to get into such a troublesome situation. You don't say. The dugongs, seeing that their chief had been defeated, flocked in around Luffy, their tails flapping in excitement and bowing to their new master. Their eyes gleamed with rest and admiration for the Straw Hat Pirate. Alright, everyone after me. Now punch. She punched the air, and the awestruck dugongs rushed to copy her. It was sloppy and incorrect, and Luffy repeated the action. No, like this. Make sure to keep your elbow bent a little. She instructed, and grinned when they repeated it again, better this time. Yeah, now harder. She continued to shout random instructions, punching the air and teaching the various moves. It gave the crew time to prepare the rations and bags, as well as properly dock the ship. It was only when everything was properly distributed, that they realized the problem. Luffy had taught the dugongs a final move before turning to the crew grinning, and oblivious to the rows of dugongs behind her. Yosh, let's go to Yuba. Hey, Luffy, wait, you are not bringing them with us. Her first mate instantly protested, flat out refusing to allow her to bring them with her. At first, her face fell into an adorable pout, and he felt his resolve waver, but he was saved by Nami. You can't, Luffy, Nami said, finalizing the choice. Seeing the captain looking a little put out, Vivi gently added, Luffy, dugongs are water creatures. They won't make it in the desert. It was hard to say no, especially as they watched the dugongs cling to the pants of their master, refusing to stay behind. They were so cute. It's going to break my heart to say no to them, Nami whispered to Vivi with a sigh. I agree, but they really won't make it. How are we going to get them to stay? This problem seemed to answer itself immediately, as they watched, to their amazement as Luffy picked up the chief dugong. She brought him up to her face, giving him a very serious look. Dugong-chan, you have done well. My friends and I are going into the desert now, but we have to leave our ship behind. I have a very important mission for you. The dugong nodded eagerly to the words, and Luffy smiled a bit more. I need you to watch and protect our ship. It's something I can only entrust to you. Will you do this for me? The dugong didn't even need to consider it, and instead saluted his master and made an affirmative noise. She gave him a wide grin, hugging the dugong and setting him back down. Thanks, Dugong-chan. I knew I could count on you. Instantly, the dugongs set up a sort of guard in front of the ship, waving to their master as she and her crew walked off into the desert. She was walking backwards, waving to them and shouting goodbyes. How shocking it had been for the dugongs when they realized that their new master could not only speak to them, but understood them. None of the others in her pod were able to, with the exception of the reindeer that was able to translate for them. There had been something odd and inhuman about her from the moment she had hopped down from the ship though. It was the same with the dark-haired male who had the scent of fire on him, although he had been unable to understand them. The crew was in a similar state of awe, and it was when they were a ways away from the ship that Nami turned to Luffy questioningly. Luffy, how do you get them to stay? The navigator questioned her captain. It was almost as if you could talk to them. Ace was just as curious as the others, and was watching her to access her reaction and response. It was odd because he never remembered her being particularly good with animals as a child. I just asked them to help us out, Luffy explained, wondering if she had done something wrong. She had done nothing more than guarantee their ship would be looked after should anything happen. That and she didn't want to share any meat this time. Why? It just seemed to me like you could understand them and vice versa. I just don't understand it. Luffy-Quan is just amazing. Sanji butted in a moment later. You should have seen her back on Drum Island. She did something similar with a baby Lapin and they held off the Wapple bastard when he tried to attack us on our way to get Nami to the doctor. Luffy-chan was amazing. Sanji twirled around Luffy as he said this, his eyes bright. It made her the slightest bit uncomfortable, still not used to such reception from her cook. She didn't mind it so much when it got her more food, but when it was just out of the blue, it was just odd. Ace seemed to sense her discomfort, and sent a scowl at Sanji. The man, although not seeing Ace's scowl, felt a shiver run down his spine and instantly backed away from the captain. He was glad that his sister had no obvious interest in the men of her crew, which was something he would admit to worrying about. After seeing the men-to-female ratio, what big brother wouldn't worry? His eyes finally reverted to Luffy, Sanji being a reasonable distance away, and he pondered the new developments. Was it possible that Luffy had been born with it too? How Shoku Haki? That's so strange. Usually Lapins just attack humans, and I've never heard of them helping one before. How'd you do it? Chopper chattered excitedly, looking at Luffy with both confusion and interest. Well, Sanji was about to kick the baby Lapin, but I stopped him. Maybe it was because I saved him. She improvised, only telling half the truth and trying not to appear guilty. She didn't want to explain Haki, if she even could. She had always been awful at explanations. Luckily, they all seemed to buy it, with the exception of Sanji, who gave her a long look. It was obvious she had done more than that, but was she just being modest, or was she actually hiding something? So really, it's your own fault you almost ruined your back, Usopp wondered out loud as he recalled the events of Drum Kingdom. The sniper probably should have kept this opinion to himself however, as it quickly began an argument. Nami groaned loudly as Zoro was dragged into the fight, and told them to shut up. They of course, did not heed her words and continued to bicker. Luffy was watching the entertainment, grinning and laughing. That was, until they finally reached the peak of a sand dune, and the sight before them caused them all to fall silent. Before them, what may have once been a city was reduced to ruins. Rubble lay spewed across the sand, most of it half buried. Trees, plants and desert growth peeked out from beneath the sand, but they were long dead, the water having been sucked dry from their roots long ago. This is the city of Arumalu. Or, I suppose, what it used to be. It was known far and wide as the City of Green, Vivi explained. Her voice was tight, as though she were about to start crying, and when she turned to the pirates, the emotion was clear on her face. She was obviously suppressing how much it truly hurt, though they only saw a fraction of her pain. Take a good look around, everyone. This is what Baroque Works has been doing to my country. This is what my people, the people of Alabasta, have had to, and continue to go through. The crew, for the most part, was sobered by her words. They continued to walk, trekking through the hot streets of the dried-up city. Any buildings that remained were weathered and worn, and threatened to come crashing down at any minute. And there's absolutely nothing here anymore. Usopp commented idly as they passed another empty building, filled with sand and teetering on its supports. No, it's nothing more than a ghost town, Vivi replied sadly. But up until a few years ago, it was a sight to see. Arumalu used to be a thriving city full of gardens, palm trees, and lush greenery, hence the name, City of Green. This place, Zoro scoffed unbelievingly, and nudging a dead tree. It was hard to believe what she was saying as he watched the bark literally crack and break off of the tree. The locals would save and use every drop of water. Vivi drifted off, explaining everything she could about the city. How it had dried up after someone blocked the canal to the river, and the usage of dance powder, how her father had been framed, and how it had caused doubt amongst her people. This is the canal that was blocked up, right, Vivi? Luffy asked as they approached something that looked as though it might have been a large road at one point. Why yeah, Vivi said, looking startled that the captain had been so observant. It used to pump water in from the Sandora River. Until it was destroyed. With the canal gone, the City of Green lost its only remained source of fresh water, and rain never came. That and the dance powder really would make people lose faith in their king, Nami pointed out, and Vivi nodded. When they no longer had water, fighting broke out. And those who wished to escape the fighting could do nothing but abandon the city. They left in search of other oases and she paused, and took a deep breath. The City of Green simply withered away. No sooner was that said than the wind, which had been nothing more than a simple breeze before, picked up. Sand blew everywhere, blinding the pirates. A low, dreadful sound began to ring throughout the town, only becoming more intense with the wind until it became a full-out howl. What is that? Is it the rebels? Or more creeps from Baroque Works? Ace was the voice of reason amidst the chaos. No, it's just the wind. Luffy turned to Ace, barely able to make out his form with all the sand. It sounds like a voice, doesn't it? It's coming from all directions. This really isn't good, Ace, what are we going to do? Usopp panicked, and turned to who appeared to be the strongest one present. There's really no danger, it's just the wind echoing throughout the town, off the old buildings. It's almost like the city of Arumalu is wailing over what happened to it, Vivi said, her voice coming out raw with emotions that for the first time since arriving at the city, held traces of anger. The wind roared up, bringing a large chunk of sand with it this time, catching most of the members of the crew off guard. The wind tore at their clothes and skin, unforgiving and ruthless. Luffy opened her eyes, feeling most of the sand pass. She turned on her heel, watching the storm disappear. Within, a shadow stood, and she caught a glimpse of a coat. Crocodile's coat. Luffy grinned, knowing she wasn't far from the upcoming battle, and the idea of it made her adrenaline run. She shouted at the retreating storm. Oi, I'll kick your ass, Crocodile. Chapter 9, Unshared Secrets. I know you aren't hurt, Luffy stated as she stared at the birds, scattered across the hot sand, and scowled. The birds did not drop their act, and one let out a keening whine of pain. Luffy ignored this, choosing instead to plop herself down on a rock in the shade as she waited for her crew. You know the saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I'm not going to be fooled and you cannot fool me. I'm not giving you anything. This being said, the captain crossed her arms stubbornly, but did not take her eyes off of them. She didn't want to risk anything. Despite how clear it was that she was completely serious, the Warusagi did not give up. Time passed, and finally, a single bird moved. However, instead of walking away in dejection, the Warusagi, a small one, probably a baby, walked towards her. She frowned at it. Look, my crew and I need this food. We have a long way to go still, so I can't let you take it, Luffy explained, surprisingly gentle. The bird didn't give up, and instead plopped its head down into Luffy's lap. Luffy didn't react, still holding a grudge against them for stealing the food the first time around. This time was almost different, and after a moment, she felt her resolve waver. She could tell the animal was hungry, and the long-beaked creature was actually going to forest to beg. Besides, not having to feed the dugongs ensured that she had extra food as it is. She glanced behind her at the supplies. How she had ended up with all of them again, she wasn't sure. Okay, fine, you can have a bit. But only a little. The baby let out a little happy little chirp, which immediately grabbed the other Warusagi's attention. They rushed forward, only to come to a screeching halt when Luffy yelled at them. Oi, everyone stop. You have to wait your turn or you aren't getting anything. I won't give you a crumb. The birds, if it was possible, managed to look ashamed, and each waited their turn as Luffy gave them each a decent-sized portion. It was only when the last one was given some food and flew away that Luffy heard her voice. That was surprising charitable of you, Ayum teased, causing Luffy to jump slightly, and her smile to slip into a scowl. Sharing food, that is. Luffy ignored the jibe, relaxing back after the rocks after a moment. I wish you wouldn't do that. Do what? Point out how rare it is for you to stray from your usually insane gluttonous habits. Ayum asked, her tone sounding serious but her face playful. No. Appear, out of thin air. Zoro finally gave up asking about you, and I don't need Ace on my tail if he sees you. Luffy exclaimed, clearly frustrated. If they get too suspicious, I'll have to too. Explain. You know you will have to eventually, Ayum interrupted calmly, but there was a sliver of ice in her tone. She dropped down next to Luffy, frowning. In the light, Luffy could see that her physical form had not changed in the slightest since Drum Island, despite the fact she had made multiple appearances lately. That probably didn't have anything to do with it anyway. Plus, they are ages away. I'll be gone before they get back. It's just nice to not be cooped up, even for just a few minutes. Cooped up? Luffy asked curiously, the last part getting her attention. Yes, Luffy, cooped up, Ayum said, sounded irritated. What did you think? That I've just been following you around, somehow invisible to all? The look on Luffy's face clearly said that that's exactly what she was thinking. You haven't. Ayum sighed, rolling her eyes. No, I haven't. It took a moment for Luffy to comprehend, before asking, where have you been then? The ghost-like woman just stared at Luffy pointedly in reply. When Luffy just stared back, she grew annoyed. Sarcastically, she mocked, guess. It took Luffy only a second, and her eyes widened dramatically. Have you been inside of me? The punch that sent her flying forward was surprisingly physical, and painful, despite the woman's transparent appearance. Of course not. I couldn't imagine a single person that would be able to stay in your mind and stay sane. My soul wouldn't fit in your body. Their area already two souls battling it out, I'm not keen on joining. And besides, who'd wanna be in there, hearing all your thoughts? Food. Fight. Zoro, food. Ayum crudely mimicked, and Luffy wasn't sure why this sent her face up in flames. Not sure what to say in response, she changed the topic back to Ayum. Then where have you been? The anklet. Ayum replied simply. The anklet. Luffy gasped out incredulously, tugging up the skin-protecting cloth to see the golden accessory that gleamed almost blindingly in the sun. How? Yes, the anklet. It's a host. Seeing Luffy's questioning look, she hurried to explain. Like the genie in the lamp. Except for souls. And it's the one with the powers. It's the link between us, the reason that I, who's nothing more than a bodiless soul, can stand before you, looking like I once did. Also, the stones making up the anklet. They are the blood, the sacrifice, of your nakama. They are what causes your injuries to heal. The blood seemed to drain from her previously flushed face, her gaze dropping to the crimson stones, her face a mixture of pain and disbelief. The blood they shed saving you, it helped bring us here. It saved them in the end, and it heals you, however, it won't extend much further than that. The sacrifice will not save the person it was meant for. Almost a bit ironic, Luffy opened her mouth to speak, but Ayum had once again disappeared before her questions could be answered. Oi, don't run off like that, Luffy. She could hear Zoro's irritated voice growing closer, and looked up in time to see the crew coming around the corner of the outcropping she sat in. She yanked her overcloth down, hiding the anklet from view as she smiled brightly. Nay, I was hungry and Vivi said we could eat, she said quickly, ignoring her brother's concerned gaze. Luffy, are you okay? He asked immediately. Her smile faltered and she hurried to think of an excuse. No, I'm not okay, she said, continuing on when she saw his alarmed expression. She looked up, trying to find a decent excuse, something that would draw the attention from her. Those birds looked hungry, so I shared our food with them. As it would work out, it had the opposite effect on the crew, and their eyes found the supplies. The amounts had definitely dwindled since they had lost saw them. Liar, you ate it all, didn't you? Usopp accused loudly, as Nami hit her over the back of her head. Luffy held her head and pouted as Sanji came to her defense. Never accuse Luffy-chan of such a thing, he growled, defending the captain. The two continued to bicker until Vivi broke in. The distraction the princess provided was enough to bring the argument to a stuttering halt. It wasn't Luffy, Vivi said calmly, and both the men went silent. The Warusugi birds are known for tricking travelers and making off with their supplies. What's surprising is that they didn't take everything. Luffy glanced up at Vivi, giving her a large grin. Actually, they just asked, so I gave them a bit. The statement was met by angry and annoyed groans. Even Vivi looked irked by the captain's nonchalance. Did she not realize that the lot of them could die at any time in this desert? Well, at least you didn't give them everything, Vivi said, pushing away her anger. She couldn't let her temper get the best of her. Not now, at least. She crouched next to the supplies, checking through them and giving a small nod as she counted. We still have plenty, thankfully. We can still stop and eat here, but we'll need to continue on our way until we find somewhere to camp for the night. Since we only have a few hours, we have to act quickly. The words had barely been processed by the crew when the ground began to rumble beneath their feet. The entire crew turned in time to see an enormous lizard emerge from the earth. Screams echoed around as the creature rose before them. It stood meters above them, deep, dangerous purple scales shimmering in the sun. What is that? Nami wailed miserably. She scattered away, pulling Chopper and Usopp with her. I forgot to mention the Sandora lizards. They're extremely dangerous and burrow beneath the ground. They surprise unsuspecting travelers and feed on them. The words had barely left her mouth, and Luffy had already thrown herself at the monster with laugh. Wait, Luffy. But the monster didn't attack Luffy, and the crew's jaws dropped as Luffy casually scratched at the rough scales where the head met the neck. Instead of attacking her, it dropped like an overgrown scaly dog, letting a growl rip through its body, and its large tongue lolled from its huge mouth. "Ah, that's a good boy, oops, I meant girl, sorry." Luffy crooned to the beast. With a resounding thump, the creature rolled onto its back and squirmed happily. The crew could do nothing but stare, shell-shocked, as Luffy continued to pet the creature as though it were a small and tamed house pet. There was no doubt in Ace's mind at this point. She had been gifted with King's Haki. The only question that remained was how conscious she was that she had the gift. As far as he could see, it was limited to her interactions with animals, but he couldn't be sure at the time. The crew didn't even have it in them to be surprised as a second monster joined the first on above the surface. It had snarled, roared, defended its hunting partner, before falling victim to Luffy's charm himself. I forgot they travel in pairs. Vivi said faintly, but no one was listening to her anymore. They were too focused on their captain, who was now covered in whatever liquid-white substance was on the lizard's tongue. It had ran her large purple tongue from her shins over the top of her head, leaving her hair more messy than usual and dripping goop, in some form of affection. I guess we could have eaten them, but this is probably better, Luffy said with a grin, finally breaking away from the lizards who sat down like dejected puppies in her absence. She walked back to her recovering nakama. They'll bring us to Yuba. It'll be far quicker than us walking, so we can stay here for the night. But Luffy, it'll be fine. You gotta trust me, Nami. Luffy said, with a childish grin that screamed, do not listen to me. At the same time, if she argued any further, Luffy could simply pull out the captain's orders card. It's already getting late, look. And these guys have been hunting all day. We all could do with a break. It was terrifying how casually their captain could admit that these creatures had been hunting. It only implied that they had stumbled across them on an empty stomach, the last thing anyone wanted in desert. Nami was the first to voice this worry. I am not sleeping anywhere near a hungry monster. Yeah, it's dangerous. Usopp agreed readily. In return, they were given a betrayed look from their captain. They won't hurt us, she insisted with a pout. Her bottom lip jutted out as she looked at her crew pleadingly. Sanji moved closer to Nami. Maybe not you, Luffy-chan, but I'm not so sure about the rest of us, Sanji muttered. I'm with Nami Swan with this one. Only Zoro and Ace stood by her, Vivi caught in the middle. As Luffy looked at her desperately, one of the lizards let out a low grumble. Chopper immediately translated, we were only looking for dessert, actually. Quote, that's not any more reassuring. Nami snapped at the beast, before squealing and crawling away when it blinked at her. It could eat her in a single bit, swallow her whole, and she thought it was a good idea to yell at it. Surprisingly, it was Vivi who spoke up after this. She had been deep in thought through most of the conversation. I think we should trust Luffy, Vivi announced, earning her an excited yelp from Luffy. It's nearly impossible to train a Sandora lizard, most attempts ending in death. In the few rare successes, usually conducted from the lizard's birth and over multiple years, they have been proven to be extremely loyal. Seeing this one tamed so simply, I'm positive they won't harm us. Plus, we need the extra time to rest and plan for our trip to Yuba. The crew looked unsure and hesitant. Who wouldn't be after your captain just decided you'd be sleeping with two beasts on board? Finally, Nami gave in and nodded. Fine, but only because Vivi said we could trust them. If any of us get eaten, they won't eat anyone, Luffy said offhandedly, before marching towards the supplies. I'm so hungry, though. Food, food. It was only Zoro's hand, reaching out and catching the scruff of her clothes that saved their already depleting rations. Sanji stepped forward and began to paw through what was left of their supplies. He divided the rations appropriately amongst the crew as they settled down. Luffy instantly dug in wildly, while the others were much more polite. There was less urgency now. They were sure to reach Yuba by noon tomorrow, with the help of the lizards, and had little to worry about. That, and no matter what Vivi did, the crew had fallen into its usual ridiculous antics as the night fell. Even Chopper joined in as it grew colder, and Ace watched his sister with a soft smile. Luffy and Usopp, at first, seemed oblivious to the cold that was setting into the night and ran around with Chopper. As they chased each other, the purple lizards, whom Luffy had decided to name Sandy and Dora watched them with something akin to amusement. They seemed to find it entertaining when a blast of cold air hit Usopp's face, and he scattered away to join the others. Luffy followed, pouting at how her fun had come to an abrupt stop. How did G get so cold? Usopp shivered, pulling his clothing tighter around him desperately. Vivi copied the movement, and moved closer to the group. Now that Luffy had joined them, Sandy and Dora had curled around them in a protective circle. Despite her words, she couldn't help but be fearful of them. All her life she had known them as feared creatures. It's because of the lack of clouds. When the crew turned to her questioningly, she let out a sigh and turned to explain. Well, there's no cloud coverage. So there is nothing to keep the heat in at night or block the sun during the day. Ah, Nami mumbled in agreement, having already figured it out. It didn't make it any less cold and a shiver ran through her. Luffy noticed. Without a second thought, she pulled off her robes and slung them over Nami's shoulders. Luffy, what? Luffy grinned reassuringly at her navigator. Can't have you getting sick on us again. Well, we can't have a sick captain, either, Zoro quickly pointed out protectively. He was ready to pull of his own to give her, but she just shook her head at him. I'm not really cold, she said, her face lighting up as she did so. Besides, I have an ace. As she spoke, she happily dropped herself into said pirate's lap, who welcomed her with open arms. Not a warmth, per se, but a feeling similar to it spread through her body with the familiar arms wrapped around her. It was something she was growing used to. There was no heat, no cold, no pain. Perhaps it had something to do with what Ayum said about the anklet. She would have to ask, later. Right now she was perfectly content against Ace's chest. Tired, are we? Ace asked, watching with fondness in his eyes as she yawned loudly. She glanced at him, her eyes dropping slightly as she nodded. He chuckled and ruffled her hair, consequently getting some leftover lizard goop on his hand. Go to sleep, Luffy. No sooner were the words said, that her head dropped against his shoulder, fast asleep. He laughed again, running his fingers through her hair and wincing at the goop. At least something's never changed. He was grateful he could have his little sister back in at least one way. Although he couldn't help but notice that as she wrapped her rubbery arms around him, that she had a slightly tighter grip than he was used to. It didn't seem that she would be letting go for a while now, even in subconsciousness. As he stared at his sister, his eyes were filled with both worry and pride. Worry, because she seemed so extremely different than last time he saw her, but he couldn't place why. She almost seemed darker, more mature. It was easy to look past it when she laughed or grinned, or even said something stupid, but it was there. And painfully obvious for her brother. Still, the pride swelled within him. She had made it far, may have even mastered hockey in their small time apart. When he finally turned his gaze away from his sister, he was met with the crew's eyes on him. A few of the odd gazed turned away quickly, but Nami smiled at him, and the swordsman didn't bother look away from the siblings. Or maybe his eyes were only on Luffy. I'm sorry, she must be quite the handful at times, Ace said, and Luffy shifted in his arms, as if reacting to his voice. Oh, not really, Nami quickly replied, sounding slightly flustered. Ace's eyebrows rose, finding the statement difficult to believe. There was no way his sister was staying out of trouble. That just wasn't her thing. Not at all, he asked in disbelief. Well, yeah, Usopp reluctantly joined the conversation. She's always getting into trouble, and not listening. Sometimes it's hard to believe that she's the captain. Oi, don't say stuff like that about our lovely captain. Sanji butted in, glaring at Usopp as he defended the Straw Hat captain. Ace watched the exchange with amusement. Well, it's true. Although she does fight really well and she's always there to help us, Usopp amended under Sanji's glare. Even if we don't need it. At this, Ace laughed, bringing the attention back to him. Luffy has always been like that, he said fondly. Luffy shifted again, either at the sound of their voices, or sensing she was being discussed. The movement resulted in her vest tugging up the slightest bit as she pressed her face into Ace's neck. Ace sighed and reached around to pull it down, when he caught sight of something. Something that was off, foreign and certainly should not be on her skin. He ran his fingers across the mark, feeling the smooth scar tissue, and scowled. It wasn't any ordinary wound. His eyes trailed across to her exposed shoulder, where a matching scar tainted her skin. His eyes darkened. The campsite was silent, save the captain's soft snores, and the roaring of the wind that Sandy and Dora's bodies protected them against. No one dared to utter a word as the protective brother attempted to make sense of the wounds. He ran his fingers over it again, and the girl tense in his arms. He retracted his hand quickly and she relaxed against him. His expression was full of confusion, questions, worry and above all, anger. But he said nothing. He doubted the crew would know much about it. If she hadn't spoken to him, her brother, about it, he refused to believe she told her nakama. He tugged her shirt down to cover the mark on his waist, adjusted the sleeve, and pulled her closer to him. The look in his eyes clearly said this was far from over. Oi, you finished packing yet, Marimo? Sanji snapped, earning him a tired grumble in return. The sun was beginning to rise, and they needed to leave as soon as possible. They would have been fine, had Luffy's newly acquainted pets not gone running off in the night. Now they were ages behind schedule. Well, at least they could consider themselves lucky that the aforementioned pet had not chosen them as a tasty midnight snack. Well, Nami Swan has us on a tight schedule. What's taking so long? Zoro finished with his part of the supplies and threw Sanji a dark glare. If you cared to notice, Luffy's disappeared, so somebody had to finish her part. Don't blame your laziness on Luffy-chan, Sanji began. Besides, she was right here. He turned, only to find she wasn't where she had been at all. Where'd Luffy-chan go? Sanji cried, spinning to face Zoro, who only shrugged. Don't you care? Zoro's usual glare darkened into a glower as though Sanji had just insulted him. Not care about the captain. He did far more than anyone here. She can take care of herself, curlybrow. She probably didn't go that far anyways. No sooner had the words left his mouth than they heard the yelling. It sounded almost panicked. Sandy, Dora. Luffy was practically wailing into the open desert, running around frantically. Where'd you go? She dashed past the two men, who could do nothing more than blink at their captain. Then she was gone again, reminding the two of a protective mother hen. They really shouldn't have been so surprised. After all, she was protective of every right. Perhaps it was the mothering tone that had taken them off guard. She was back moments later, panting and looking up at them in a way that was undeniably adorable. Where would Sandy and Dora go? She asked desperately, as if they had the answers for her. Was all Sanji could muster, all his attention on her face, which he should be more careful about with a protective brother slinking about, than the question. I'm sure they just went hunting, Luffy, Zoro reassured the captain calmly. It wouldn't be surprising if they got hungry and wandered off to find something. Her eyes lit up, her grin blinding. Yeah, you're right, we should wait for them. Zoro rolled his eyes. We don't have time for that. But, maybe they'll find us on the way, Sanji said, being much more gentle with the news than Zoro. Was the man heartless? But for now, we have to get going. She threw him such a bright smile, and for a moment his heart fluttered in high chest uncontrollably. Oh, so much he wasn't going to say. His captain was simply adorable. But no matter how much he wanted to gush, it would have to remain unspoken for as long as her protective brother lucked around. Yosh, she nodded eagerly, ready to get going. She heaved a bag of supplies up, throwing it over her shoulder with ease. Let's get going then. The two hurried to grab supplies as she rocked impatiently on her heels. Nami, Usopp, Chopper, Vivi, we're going now. The mentioned people made their way to join them, but it was too slow for Luffy, who was both eager to find her pets and kick Crocodile's ass. Hurry up. Nami let out a huff. Says you and your pets are the reason we're in this whole mess. But only moments later, they were ready to go, arms full of their supplies. With impatient whines from their captain, they took off for Yuba. It was still morning, the sun only just rising, and there was still a cool crispness in the air. It didn't remain as so for long, as the sun quickly rose and brought the full-blown heat of the desert with it. It wasn't long until Zoro had to start pulling Chopper along behind them. Like all trips with the Straw Hats, it wasn't a quiet journey. Luffy loudly whined about her pets, while Usopp complained about how Chopper got it easy. Chopper would snap back, more often than not switching forms. That in turn would result in Zoro yelling at him to go small, and then return to bickering with Sanji. Quite frankly, Nami was growing more and more annoyed. Sandy, Dora, stupid Marimo, why does Chopper get to be pulled? You try having this much fur in this temperature. Would you all just shut up? Stop bickering, the lot of you. And by gods, Luffy, would you just give it up? The group fell silent, Luffy's face falling into one of despair. Nami opened her mouth to speak, and the ground began to rumble once again. Annoyed, she swung on her heel and prepared to scream at whatever was coming at them this time. What she wasn't expecting was to see two large lizards bounding towards the crew. At first she was shocked, speechless, and then confused. Why would they be charging? Realizing dawned on her as she caught sight of the creature they were chasing. Hunting, really. They were running towards the crew at such a pace that they would surely be trampled. Before anyone could utter a sound, Luffy was plowing towards the beasts. Sandy-chan, Dora-chan, stop, she hollered, but the lizards continued to rush after the smaller creature. Luffy, hands on her hips before them, was not pleased. I said, stop. She sent a punch that hooked around and caught the closer one in the jaw. It tumbled with a cry, knocking the other over with it. The Sandora's prey, which could not be identified as a camel, ran and cowered behind Luffy. She looked at her lizards with disappointment on her face. They slowly shifted, raising to their feet unsteadily, and looking almost guilty. I told you to stop. And why'd you run off last night? Luffy scolded the monsters. Nami gave me a lot of trouble, you know. Sanji and Zoro both looked at the navigator, suddenly understanding the reason behind Luffy's behavior this morning. They turned back in time to see the slightly larger on hesitantly licking Luffy's head, in an act that may have sought forgiveness. Luffy, being Luffy, gave way right away. She reached out and scratched the purple monster's neck in a way that spoke of complete and utter forgiveness. Okay, I forgive you. But no eating the camel, and you have to take us to Yuba, Luffy demanded childishly. While the lizards managed to look upset about not being able to eat the camel, they easily gave in. Luffy turned to the camel, smiling brightly. Hey, you're safe now, so will you help us get to Yuba? The camel looked at the large lizards distrustfully, but then made some nodded gesture and butted its head lightly against Luffy's chest. Luffy laughed. Fine, but I'll only let women onto my back. Chopper translated as the camel stepped away from Luffy. Sanji and Zoro's eyes narrowed on the creature, but Nami and Vivi silently rejoined in the fact they would not be riding the beasts. Why you? Sanji began, glaring at the camel. Pervert, Usopp finished bitterly, knowing he was doomed to riding the purple beasts. Be nice to eyelashes, Nami automatically crooned her, reaching out to scratch the creature under his chin. Eyelashes? Zoro questioned, giving her a criticizing look. And he thought Luffy's naming skills were bad. You've already named it. Well, of course, after all. Guys, I think we have other things to worry about right now, Usopp cut in, ignoring the looks he received from the two. Usopp's right, we have to get to Yuba as soon as possible, Vivi began, looking around for the Sandora training captain. Surprisingly, the girl had already started taking things and placing them carefully on top of her lizards. She had already hoisted Chopper up onto one of them, and she practically forced Usopp onto the same one. Are you riding eyelashes, Luffy? She had already known the answer, as the girl was climbing up onto Dora's back, where Ace and Zoro joined her. Sanji scowled, having no choice but to join the two younger idiots on Sandy's back. Okay, so we head to Yuba from here. It's the only way to talk to them and stop the revolution, Nami said as they climbed onto the camel. See you there. With that, she nudged eyelashes and he took off ahead of them. The Sandora lizards moved faster than they could have ever hoped to, but it was still nothing in comparison to the camel. If they wanted a gentle ride, that is. Luffy had urged them forward and they had bolted, but the movement had shaken everyone so much they decided to slow just a bit. The ride was oddly silent for a while. Occasionally, Sanji and Zoro would bicker from across the lizards. Chopper himself was quite relaxed. The heat was harsh, but the lizards were surprisingly cool, keeping him cool. Usopp just sat, tinkering. It took them a while to realize the reason it was so quiet was because of Luffy's silence. Ace was the first to notice. He had been watching his sister almost the entire time, but just now he caught sight of her shivering, her back to them. He moved toward swiftly, worried. Zoro followed suit. Luffy, are you alright? Ace asked gently, reaching out and resting his hand on her shoulder. They didn't accept her to let out a blood-curdling screech at the contact. Zoro took a step back without meaning to, and the other three looked over in worry. Ace didn't back away, but his look of concern deepened. What's going on, Luffy? Luffy turned to look at him, her eyes wide in horror. Her voice came out a croaking, incomprehensible whisper. What? Ace asked, his voice as tight as his grip. There's, so, much, be blood, she croaked after a moment, looking up at him in absolute terror. It caused his heart to clench in fear. What are you talking about, Luffy? I told her it was a bad idea. Usopp groaned, and Ace glanced up at him for only a second. I mean, she was thirsty and so she helped herself to some cactus juice. She's probably hallucinating, Chopper said softly, when Luffy suddenly stood up. She shrugged off Ace's hand, turning to him with a dangerous look in her eyes. I can't stand this blood anymore. I won't let anyone else die. She screamed it at no one in particular, before suddenly becoming fascinated with Ace's chest. Ace, don't leave me, Ace. Please, why'd you do that? Ace was becoming more and more concerned as she reached out, about to touch his bare chest, and seemed to think the better of it. There were tears in her eyes, but when he reached out, she simply took his hand and dropped to her knees. You didn't have to do that, Ace. Why'd you sacrifice yourself? I would have gladly died. I can't live without you. I need you, Ace. Don't leave me. I'm here, Luffy, I'm not leaving, he said softly, crouching before her and reaching out for her once more. She leant into the touch eagerly, but it didn't stop the tears. I would give it up, you know. I don't want to be king of the pirates if you aren't there. I just want my brother. Please. The blood was almost too much for her. Ace crouched before her, bloodied as the day he had died. It was the day he died. The large hole in his chest wouldn't heal, no matter what she did. Nothing Ace did would help. She truly believed him to be dead. He just watched his sister in shock, not sure what to do. Finally, Zoro stepped forwards and reached out for her arm. She winced at the touch, but allowed him to guide her hand towards Ace's chest. She winced as though she were causing someone intense pain, trying to pull her hand away. As soon as her hand came in contact with Ace's chest, though, she relaxed. Ace looked between the two of them wildly, unsure what to think. She felt his heart, still beating faintly beneath her fingertips, and her breathing calmed. Her hand bunched into a small fist over Ace's chest, and she began to wail. She was still clearly stuck in her hallucination. She let out a quiet cry, and then slumped against Ace's chest. Aha! Chopper cheered, holding an empty syringe. Ace felt a tick of anger, but brushed it away. While yes, he drugged her, he had also calmed her down immensely. He gathered his sister in his arms, holding her close as she curled up, completely out of it. What the hell was that? Zoro growled. Well, the cacti that she decided to drink from triggered hallucinations. I don't know why they were focused around Ace, but they were pretty extreme hallucinations. You don't say, Ace muttered sarcastically, before his face softened into an apologetic look. Sorry, I've never seen her like that before. It happens sometimes, Zoro said, dropping down next to the duo. Her nightmares can make her violent at times, or keep her up. I think they cause her similar hallucinations. Ace frowned, shifting the girl so she was in a more comfortable position. And that's how you knew what to do. Well, we've never seen her this bad before, Sanji said from the other lizard, watching the scene as he lit up a cigarette. She wakes up, screaming about us dying. It's like she needs reassurance that we're alive. Ace looked at his sister. What the hell had happened to her in the last few years? I spent all night digging this up for you. The old man held out a container of water to the young girl. She glanced at it and smiled. She carefully took it, tying the pouch of water around her neck and cradling it gently. He had worked hard to get this for her. She wasn't going to waste a drop. Thank you, Ojii-san. I'll make sure the rain returns. It had taken them a while to catch up with the camel, who seemed set on being at least 50 paces ahead of them. It hadn't forgiven the lizards for almost eating them. After they had at least located the camel, it had only taken them a few hours to reach what had once been the Revolutionary Army's headquarters. It was deserted, completely and utterly empty, without the slightest sign of life. Until they had found Vivi's old friend, Toto. He had explained how the city had become barren, and how they had left for somewhere better. He had remained, continuing to dig and search for the water once more. Well, that puts a damper on our plans, Sanji said, sounding stressed as he climbed onto Sandy's back. They had eased up on their fear of the beasts, especially as the two of them had saved them from a giant scorpion attack. They had woken up to the large beasts chomping on the creature. We need to go back to Nanohana. Vivi cried. If she could just talk to the rebels, explain everything. I'm positive. Vivi, Luffy started, causing the princess to fall silent. Her voice was oddly serious. Do you really believe that talking to them will do anything? Do you think it will save anyone? Of course, I mean. No matter what you do, Crocodile will make this attack happen. There will be a loss of life no matter what we do from this point on. This is not a childish fight. This is war. Her eyes hardened. The way she spoke, she had seen war, been ravaged by it. War had taken something from her. Something precious. When she looked up, it wasn't hard to see why she was the captain. It was a side of her that was hard to see, a side that surprised Ace more than her hallucinations. You need to listen to me, Vivi. We don't know the situation, the war could have very well begun by this point. We're all risking our lives here, Vivi. Luffy, Vivi stuttered. Luffy being serious meant the situation was dire. She felt the fear come down on her like a wave. I want you to take Sandy with Sanji, Nami and Chopper. Go back to Nanohana, she ordered. Ace, Zoro, Usopp and I will go to the oasis, we'll find and stop Crocodile. Luffy wasn't sure how to feel about facing Crocodile. She knew the damage and pain Crocodile was causing, and knew she had to stop it, but all the same. In her timeline, Crocodile had become an ally. Unwittingly, yes, and still more than a bit hungry for power and money, but an ally nonetheless. She reminded herself that Crocodile wasn't an ally yet. Fighting him now didn't mean that he wouldn't fight alongside her later. She had to remember that. Luffy, Nami began, her mouth falling open. It was scary, seeing a side of Luffy that was so mature. Of course, it wore off extremely quickly. Nay, don't worry about me, Nami. Luffy stated with a huge, shit-eating grin. She jumped from her spot on Dora, walking over to stand in front of Sandy, who she stroked affectionately. Just go with them and try to stop the battle. And take care of Sandy, please. Both Dora and I would be really sad if anything happened to her. As for you, Sandy, listen to Chopper, okay? And protect everyone, please. Nami paused, before nodding and pulling on the reins. Okay, let's go. Vivi looked at the captain, worry clear in her eyes. Would the girl really be able to handle Crocodile? Then again, she had Fire Fist Ace at her side. Thank you, Luffy. Luffy laughed, helping a shaking Usopp off of Sandy's back. She gave Sandy one last little scratch before moving back to Dora. Bye. I'll see you guys soon, okay? Luffy's eyes followed them as they left in the opposite direction. They didn't move for a good few minutes, and when Luffy finally did, she had returned completely to her childish behavior. So, which way is it to the oasis again? She asked, blinking at them innocently. You don't even know the way. Zoro and Usopp exploded at the same time. It's that way, Ace said, pointing the way opposite from where the others had left. Usopp started muttering about how perfect Ace was, how he would be his savior. Ace, however, focused his attention only on Luffy. He couldn't stop thinking about how much she had changed. Hey, Lou, he called, and she turned around to look at him with bright eyes. Yeah, Ace, she asked, bounding across Dora's back to plop in front of Ace like a loyal puppy. He smirked, pulling her forward into his lap. She, unlike the rest of them, did not remember the horror from her hallucinations earlier. She only remembered drinking cacti juice and waking up in Ace's arms after being drugged. He looked down at her in concern, meeting her eyes with a small smile. He considered asking her about her scars. "I have a surprise for you, once we get out of here," he said instead. She beamed brightly, already excited even though she had no idea what he was talking about. She fell into his lap with giggles, grinning up at him childishly. "So don't go getting too badly hurt. You wanna be in good shape for this surprise." Luffy looked up at him curiously, but then shrugged it off. "Okay," she said excitedly. Besides, Crocodile doesn't stand a chance anyways. He believed her, but that didn't mean he didn't worry. They reached the rain base with time to spare. Thanks to the Sandora lizards, their journey had been cut by at least 2 days. When they arrived, Luffy was happily dozing in the hot sun. Her head was still in Ace's lap, but her legs had somehow ended up in Zoro's lap. He had looked down, rolled his eyes, and continued guiding the lizard towards the oasis. Ace had been watching the two of them for most of their trip. Zoro knew he was watching. He was well aware that Ace saw the way he looked at his sister. He was sure there was only so much time before he was confronted by the protective man. The moment they reached the city, Zoro reached out and shook her shoulder gently. She woke with a start, instantly throwing herself into Zoro's lap. She looked around excitedly, yelling something about kicking Crocodile's ass in Zoro's ear, before spotting the city. "Oi, shut up," Zoro complained, irritated. Was her screeching really necessary? She paused, looking back at Zoro with an abashed grin. "Get this thing to stop. If we march into Rain Base with it, we'll not only draw attention to ourselves but scare everyone shitless." Luffy pouted, climbing out of Zoro's lap and flinging herself in front of the large lizard. It stopped immediately, staring at its master in curiosity. "Zoro says you can't go past here," she said sadly. The lizard's head dropped unhappily and she frowned. "We'll come get you when we're done, okay? Just lay low." Ace was the first off of the lizard, watching as Zoro and Usopp jumped from its back hesitantly. Luffy instantly bounded over to them, wrapping her rubbery arms around Zoro and clinging to him. "I want food, Zoro. Food and water. I'm thirsty." Zoro only groaned in response, trying to untangle her limbs from his. She held fast, her head on his as she took in the oasis. "We should eat there." She pointed excitedly at a restaurant. Zoro could feel Ace's eyes burning into them, almost literally. "Fine, just get off of me." Fury positively radiated from Ace's being as he hovered over Zoro. The two of them, Usopp, Smoker, and a very unconscious Luffy were completely drenched. "Why the fuck did you save him?" he growled, not even giving the swordsman a chance to recover before his hand lit up in flames. Zoro let out a grunt, sitting up hastily. That seemed to be the wrong move, and the fire flared. Luffy could have died. The sound of coughing filled the air. Beside Luffy, a concerned Bananawani crouched and watched her. It had been the one to save her, pulling her to safety above the water as the room flooded. There was no way she could let Smoker or Ace drown. To die like this, after everything. In this life, Smoker was of no harm to her. She couldn't sit back and watch him drown. "Ace." The voice was weak, probably from the amount of water she had swallowed. She was conscious now, blinking at them wearily. "I told him to save Smoker." "Calm down." Ace turned on his sister, the fire on his fist instantly extinguishing. "Why would you? He has devil fruit powers too. I knew the Bananawanis would help me, but Smoker needed help." It was just like his sister. Always eager to fight, but just as eager to play hero. To her, it wasn't playing anything though. It was just doing the right thing, plain and simple. "Fine." Ace stepped away from the swordsman, his fists dropping to his side. Zoro and Usopp climbed to their feet, still looking at the older brother wearily. Luffy was giving her brother a disappointed look. "We have much more important things to worry about right now. We have to find Dora and follow Crocodile." Luffy stood, ignoring Smoker as he told them he wouldn't go easy on them for saving him. Instead, she just lead her group of pirates away, not looking at the marine. "We need to hurry." Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Once in a Lifetime by Alcoholic Introvert. Chapter 10. Her Inner Battle. VIP or Pirates? Luffy read out loud to herself, pausing briefly to think about it, despite the fact that Usopp, Zoro and Smoker were all on her tail. Well, it would be bad to lie. With that, she took off down the pirate hallway, the others following her blindly. Of course, it didn't exactly come as a shock when she and the others found themselves stumbling into a cage. At least, it shouldn't have. That didn't stop the female pirate from letting out a frustrated screech and reaching for the bars. Tricked again. What the he? She drifted off as her hands came in contact with the seastone bars and collapsed heavily against them. Instantly, Zoro was at her side. He pulled her away from the bars, holding her carefully as Smoker approached them. Despite holding his captain, Zoro still managed to draw his sword from its sheath, despite Usopp's cries to not fight. He was surprised, however, when Smoker stepped around him and observed their new prison. What happened to Luffy? Usopp demanded, a streak of bravery running through him as he faced the marine. Smoker scowled at the trio of pirates, puffing on one of his cigars slowly before answering. She's fine. It's just that this prison seems to be made of sea stone. He twisted his jute in his hands as Usopp questioned as to what exactly sea stone was. It's a type of stone that gives off a similar wavelength as the sea itself. Upon contact, the stone will drain any devil fruit user's strength completely as well as negate their powers. All in all, it is the same as being thrown into the sea itself, Smoker explained grudgingly. Zoro eyed the marine's weapon after this, not at all pleased with this turn of events. He lifted his sword, only to have Usopp give him a hard shove. If you haven't noticed, we have other things to worry about. The sniper snapped. It's no use fighting him when he's not in a much better situation. That was when an unfamiliar voice pitched in, deep and relaxed but coated in mockery. He's right, you know. You will all die together, so why not make an effort to get along? The four prisoners jumped slightly at the addition of this new voice, turning to face the voice. All that greeted them was the back of a chair. Smoker frowned, recognizing the voice before anyone else, but not being the first to react. Crocodile. Luffy snarled, pushing herself away from Zoro and raising to her feet. She was still wobbly from the sea stone. She let out a growl, and Zoro just barely managed to pull her back before she came in contact with it again. The crocodile she had allied wasn't much better than the one before him, but that was in the past, her future, really. Right now, this crocodile was causing her friends pain. Smoker seemed slightly shocked the pirate could ever recognize a voice she definitely hadn't heard before, but his eyes were trained on the warlord as well. You're every bit the lowlife sea scum I imagined, he stated in his usual emotionless tone. My, Crocodile murmured, a creepy smile on his face as he gazed at the prisoners. You're every bit the wild dog I've heard you were, Smoker. Unlike most Marines, you never really thought I was on your side, did you? You were right, of course. You'll die bravely in the line of duty today, Crocodile went on in a musing tone. I'll be more than happy to inform the government about the fight you put up against the vicious, ruthless Straw Hat here. Luffy snorted, completely interrupting Crocodile's little speech. Cold eyes turned to the captain, who looked back innocently. What was that, Straw Hat? He asked coldly, but she only smirked back fearlessly in response. Usopp tugged on her arm, silently begging her not to get them killed. Do you find something funny? You're just a big stupid bag of wind and sand. Luffy yelled, shaking her Nakama's grips from her shoulder and arm, her hands resting on her hips. I might be in this cage now, but as soon as I'm out, I'm gonna kick your ass. Crocodile's eyebrows rose. You know, I'm surprised you've made it this far, Straw Hat, but I wouldn't push your luck. Don't worry, I'll dispose of you neatly and efficiently. Once our special guest has arrived, of course. Special guest? Luffy questioned, tilting her head. They hadn't captured Vivi, had they? Panic struck her deep, and she forced herself to breath. While it wasn't impossible and she could definitely still fight, it would put a damper on certain plans. She watched as Crocodile sat down at the table, smirking widely as he waited, oh so patiently for his partner to return with. It seems, Robin's voice floated over from the doorway. That the princess was unable to make it. It was almost entertaining to see Crocodile lose his cool so quickly. He stood sharply, his eyes finding his partner as he scowled. What? Robin's eyes narrowed on Crocodile. The princess did not accompany these three here. There was a long pause, before Crocodile's face fell back into one of composed disinterest. So she headed to the rebels' camp. He murmured. Either way, it doesn't matter anymore. I've had to push plans forward, but I have prepared for this. The agents know their mission. Any second, the war will be in full swing, with Mr. 2. Tisk. I'm missing the best part of the show. Crocodile was talking to himself, and the four could do nothing but listen. Finally, Crocodile straightened. In that case, I have business to attend to, and have no further use to have you guys alive. Before he could say another word, another person burst into the room. This person, however, had a flaming fist as he entered. Oi, that girl, never stops getting herself into trouble, he was muttering angrily to himself as he stormed into the room. Luffy looked up in shock just as Ace's eyes found her in the cage, and he let out an exasperated sigh. Only she would get herself stuck in a sea stone cage. Of course, her eyes lit up immediately, though. Ace, let me out so I can kick Crocodile's butt. He rolled his eyes, stepping forward without paying any mind to the angry warlord and his partner. His eyes traveled to the others in the cage and he sighed again. You know this is sea stone, right? I can't do anything without a key. Your brother is still around, Straw Hat? Smoker asked in mild surprise. Then again, he shouldn't have been. He could tell even from the brief encounter that Ace was quite protective of his little sister. Maybe we should leave the Marine in the cage, Ace stated with obvious dislike. Smoker scowled at him. It seemed as though everyone had forgotten about Crocodile until the man in question cleared his throat. Fire Fist Ace. I must say that this is a surprise, Crocodile said, his eyes narrowing on the pirate. There was no way what Smoker had said was true, right? Even if Straw Hat and Fire Fist were somehow related. What business do you have here? Ace didn't even turn to face Crocodile. I don't think that's any of your business. I'm not here to fight you, if that's what you mean. Yeah, that's my job. Let me at him, Luffy cried out, being held back once again by her crewmates. Ace, get me out of here. Crocodile rolled his eyes, simply straightening up and moving for the exit. If you have no business with me, then I suppose I'll be going. Good luck with the Bananawanis, Crocodile hummed absent-mindedly. If they don't kill you, the flood will. I'm actually quite disappointed I won't be around to see the death of the infamous Portgas D. Ace. His voice trailed off his left, Robin at his side, and Luffy let out a string of curses. No one was dying here, and not because of something as pathetic as that. She turned to Smoker, breaking free from Zoro's grip, and ripped Smoker's jute out of his hands. There was no time, and she wasn't going to waste it locked in a cage. Water began to pool around her feet and she took a deep breath. She hadn't done this yet, and hell, she wasn't even sure if it was going to work. Armament, she muttered, letting her haki flow through her and coat the weapon until the seastone tip turned a shiny black. Without hesitation, she jabbed the lock with all the power she had. The lock groaned under the attack and she struck it again. And again. The group watched in amazement as the seastone, a nearly impossible to break material, creaked and cried under the various assaults. It seemed for a moment as though the jute would snap first, when suddenly the cage lock was broken and swung open. The water was past her knees at this point, and she could feel the weakness start to set in. Not only that, but the Bananawanis had decided to join them outside of the aquarium, the monsters hovering above them with a hungry look in their eyes. Smoker was still blinking in awe, despite the fact Luffy not only had his weapon, but the water would soon be pulling him under as well. He couldn't help it. There was no way she could have broken the cage. Oi, get out here, Smokey, Luffy called, turning to glare at the man as she pointed his jute at him. Behind her, a Bananawani hovered dangerously close. It opened its jaw, only to have Ace kick it away. The kick struck the stomach, causing something to come flying from its mouth. Luffy ignored the entire thing. Unless you want to die. Might save me some trouble later. Smoker was quick to his feet after that, his face falling back into its usual expression. The water was past their waists and the exhaustion was setting in. Luffy threw the jute back to Smoker, who caught it with ease as he gazed at her with mistrust. Usopp, you have to get Ace out of here, he can't swim. Zoro, you have to. The demand was garbled over the sound of rushing water, but the first mate seemed to hear her at least understand what she was saying. Finally, she turned to the giant gator, resting a calming hand on its nose as she was nearly submerged beneath the water. The creature calmed immediately, nuzzling into her hand. She smiled, stroking the creature fondly. Elsewhere, Crocodile grinned to himself. Fire Fist Ace, brother of Straw Hat Luffy. He laughed to himself. He had to admit that the Straw Hat girl had a certain power to her. It filled her and he knew she wasn't someone he could take lightly. He, in all his cockiness and pride, didn't doubt she had been able to get out of that cage. But that was just the beginning. That didn't mean he couldn't defeat her. He thought back to the way she reacted as he mentioned killing Portgas. It seemed, he decided, that he had found a weakness. It had been at least an hour since the groups had separated. As soon as Luffy had disappeared, Vivi and Nami had instantly cracked down on the maps, pinpointing the exact location they had to be at. There was a minor scare when they were unsure how exactly they would be crossing the river, when they discovered that Sandora lizards were good at more than just digging. Things were working perfectly, and it should only be another hour before they arrived at the rebel camp. Still, Vivi shifted restless, the worry for Luffy clear on her face. She nearly jumped out of her skin when Nami's hand rested on her shoulder. She turned to see the girl smiling down at her. Don't worry about them. Luffy's a stubborn fool that refuses to die, so you can rest assured she'll defeat Crocodile and save your country. Vivi smiled grimly. If only it was that easy. Still, it was refreshing to see the complete faith that the crew had in their captain. After so long, it was still amazing to see how unwaveringly loyal they were. Because of her, and Luffy's orders, the entire band of pirates were risking their lives, fighting for her. The thought caused a warmth to fill her chest. Nami continued. She's defeated the biggest thugs in the East Blue, some of them she never even touched, if you can believe that. If anyone can free your country from this hell, it's her, as unbelievable as it seems. This time, Vivi nodded, and Sanji piped up. I'd be damned if she couldn't handle Crocodile. It isn't her first time going up against one of the 7 warlords, he stated, remembering how angry she had been at Mihawk when she believed the shitty swordsman was dead. He wondered if it had been a stroke of luck, or if she could truly beat him in a battle. But it's best to not worry about her. These petty reassurances mean nothing right now. We can only worry about getting to the rebel army's camp. Sanji flicked the butt of his cigarette behind them, on the ground. But I swear if that shitty Marimo lets her get hurt I'll kick his ass. She'll be fine. Nami snapped at the angry cook, knocking him over the back of the head. Vivi was able to manage a quiet chuckle at that. I highly doubt Mr. Bushido would allow damage to come to Luffy, Sanji-san. She smiled as they spoke quietly, Sanji fawning over Nami, Chopper occasionally adding to the conversation, and Nami bringing up old memories of things their captain did. Vivi enjoyed the little stories, and Chopper seemed just as enthusiastic. When Nami spoke, recalling her first encounter with Luffy, she didn't just hear the emotion. She could feel it. Despite the crew's crazy decisions and the captain's eccentric and wild behavior, every single one of the members loved Luffy unconditionally. When Nami paused, Vivi finally asked the question she had been curious about since joining the crew. What's her past? She finally managed. When we met, she knew who I was. I didn't have to say anything about Crocodile or my kingdom. She just knew. After everything I've gone through to hide from everyone, build up these walls. It was the same with us. She never asked, she just knew. About Arlong, about everything, Nami interrupted Vivi's rambling with a sad smile. It was quite clear that Nami had no desire to talk about the many years spent a slave to the fishermen pirates. Storming in there and kicking his ass, just because he made me cry. That'll be a story for the future generations. Despite this, it still didn't sit right with Vivi. How could they be so nonchalant? They acted as though the woman didn't already know everything about them, didn't have execution marks that had to mean something. The scars. Nami fell silent, the smile dropping from her face in an instant. I don't know, she admitted, shaking her head. I mean, she doesn't talk about her past, so what's the point of asking about it? Besides, Chopper chirped from the front of the lizard, no one can survive an execution wound. The blades go through you, all the vital organs. Even in all the craziness of this world, there's no way that she could have survived that. I don't want to think about it, but she had to have gotten those scars from something else. A fight, maybe. Maybe, Sanji agreed. No matter what Luffy had been though, the pain she had seen, she had no reason to share it with them. After all, they all had their own stories they'd rather not tell. But either way, it's none of our business. We each have our own pasts. Yeah, Vivi agreed, still unable to let it go. I wonder if she'd have told Mr. Bushido. Nami shrugs as Sanji looks startled. Why would Luffy-chan tell that shitty swordsman? It was Vivi's turn to look taken aback. He is her first mate, is he not? Though at times they do seem much more intimate than just a first mate and captain. Luffy's not one to reveal her past, not even to her first mate, Nami said quickly before Sanji could start his own little sob fest. Even if they were anything more intimate, I still don't think she would say anything. Do you think they are? Nami grinned, waving her hand dismissively. Luffy and Zoro. They were both direct, blunt, and to the point, but it would take nothing short of a miracle to get them together. Her eyes widened. She met his, pained and shocked, filled and brimming over with fear. His were glassy, locked on hers, before slowly slipping shut. Her breath caught in her throat. She choked on it, letting out a strangled cry. A suffocating weight set over her, her chest tight. She reached out, but her arm didn't follow any command. It sat limply at her side. No matter what she did, she couldn't move forward. Her heart stopped. Surely, it was not beating. Just like his, it was still motionless, lifeless, within his body. She could not hear it, after all, beating heavily in her eardrums. She wanted to cry. She couldn't bring herself to do so, the tears simply would not come. It was a dream, she told herself. A dream, a nightmare, but the scent of blood, it filled her nostrils, her mouth. She tasted it, the taste of metallic rust and death and pain. She looked down at Ace's body, blood gushing wickedly from a deep hole in his chest. A dream, she told herself, but she couldn't listen. Not when it felt so real. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was never supposed to happen. Luffy, get it together. He was shaking her, the green-haired and very much alive man. That was odd. In her nightmares, he was always dead along with the others. And while it was true he was drenched in the blood of her brother, he was alive. It wasn't a dream, wasn't a nightmare. Ace was dying, and it was all her fault. Again, the town appeared on the horizon. First as a tiny dot, but slowly growing until they could see the outlines of the buildings and tents that surrounded the city. Vivi, for the first time, felt herself begin to relax. Nami saw it too, and smiled to herself. It only lasted so long, however. It looked like a stampede at first, a large group of people walking across the land, kicking up sand and dust behind them. It didn't take them long to realize who exactly they were, before they were urging Sandy to a halt. The army was moving at an alarming rate, but Sandy was more so. When the lizard finally came to a thundering stop, they were only mere meters away from the oncoming army, which seemed to have stopped where they stood at the sight of Sandy. There was the sound of unsheathing swords, a few brave men stepping up to fight the creature as others were warning them of the lizard's partner, which had to be creeping around the area. Multiple men were swearing loudly, claiming that this was ridiculous. Sandy shifted slightly at the sounds of the voices and weapons, clearly believing these people to be enemies. When they stepped forward, you could feel the creature tense underneath them. With a cry, Vivi jumped up and off the lizard, running quickly in front of it to calm it. Chopper was, albeit scared, right behind her. The monster calmed instantly. Although they could not understand each other, the sea hare girl was Luffy's friend, and so they would protect her. When the princess turned to face the army, she could feel the lizard happily nuzzling her back, practically purring, or the lizard's equivalent at least. There were hushed whispers that spread like the wind through the crowd, murmuring under their breath as they watched the girl step away from the lizard. Are they from the castle? Is this an attack? Many asked, tense and bristled and prepared to fight. We aren't here to attack. Vivi cried out, holding her hands up in surrender. Behind her, the Sandora lizard backed up before curling up to watch with a warning gaze. She stared at the army, looking from each person to the next, before her eyes rested on one man in particular. You need not charge into a war. Please, listen to me. Her eyes were still locked on the soldier, and he hesitantly stepped forward. She offered him a small smile, one of which he did not return immediately. Vivi, is that you? The crowd fell silent, instantly recognizing their princess's name. Vivi bit her lip, before nodding and continuing. For 2 years, I have worked undercover as a Baroque works agent, she announced, feeling much more confident. They are the reason for this drought, they wanted this war. Their leader has been planning this for some time, you have to believe me. He used dance powder to dry the land. There were disbelieving looks on everyone's faces. Their beloved princess, claiming such things. True, there was no other way they could explain her 2-year absence, but surely. She was just defending her father. I did not come to make excuses for my father, but I cannot allow this war to ravage our home. Vivi shouted. She dropped to her knees before the group, who looked on in complete bewilderment. I surrender, in the name of my kingdom, I surrender. On the last words, Vivi's voice broke, and everyone heard her words. She ducked her head and pleaded, so please, don't fight. The crowd looked at the kneeling figure and for a long while, no one said anything. Finally, after what seemed like hours, one of the soldiers stepped forward. He hesitated, before running forward despite the army's shouts, and dropped to his knees before her. He reached out, a subtle shaking in his hands that only the straw hats seemed to notice, and cupped the princess's face. Vivi, the man questioned, his voice being oddly soft as he spoke her name with a fondness. Nami could swear she heard his voice shake as he continued, and Vivi raised her eyes to his face. I thought you were dead, we all did. Vivi looked almost teary-eyed as she gazed at her friend, and she nodded. The words she spoke next were only to him, whispered quietly and unheard by anyone else as she offered him a bright smile. He looked as though he might laugh, before pulling her into his arms and hugging her tightly. She let out a light laugh, the happiest one the Straw Hats had heard from her yet, and practically melted into his arms. They stayed like that for many moments, before she reluctantly pulled away. I have to go to my father, she told him, the determination shining in her eyes, along with a renewed hope. The man behind all this is targeting my father. He plans to take this nation for his own. I have to go before it's too late. Koza's hands dropped to his side, and he nodded in understanding. He stood first, reaching out and taking her hands to pull her to her feet. Beside her, he turned to face the rebel army. As the princess said, we have set our sights on the wrong enemy. You all will return to the base. Vivi turned to Koza, a frown on her face. You will too. I don't want you getting hurt by Crocodile. Koza frowned at the name, recognizing it as the country's hero, but trusted Vivi above everything. I can't stay here and let you fight alone. Vivi managed a smile at that. I'm not alone anymore. Freedom. That was her first thought, as she felt herself stretch out, no longer contained by her confinements. It was overwhelming, completely overwhelming. To be free, like this, in a body she thought she would never control again. The next was pain, an overwhelming pain she could have never imagined. It washed over her in a powerful wave, and she writhed in the agony. This was his fault, she was sure, and she had no idea how he dealt with this pain. It wasn't just the outstanding emotional pain that made her want to fall to the ground in broken sobs, the feelings of loneliness, despair and loss. It was so much more. It was a raw pain that ripped through her body, as if every wound she had ever received, including the ones he brought with him, had reopened. They hadn't. She was covered in blood, but none of it was from her, nor did she have an unhealed cut on her body. And slowly, ever so slowly, the pain began to fade from her body, leaving her a heavily panting mess. Her eyes cracked open and she came face to face with him. Green hair, dark eyes, earrings dangling and a concerned look on her face. It was a face she had come to know, belonging to man she had come to love. For so long, she had only seen him through his memories, not able to truly communicate with him, but it didn't matter. Luffy was her, and she was him. Just in the same, Zoro was always Zoro. Some things, it seemed, never changed. Ace, she rasped, tearing her eyes away from the swordsman that she hadn't chosen, but wouldn't have traded for anyone in the world. What? He was sitting up, clutching the wound. Her eyes hardened upon seeing the blood, and she jumped to her feet. It hurt, burned, but she stepped forward, facing where the hook had appeared in the desert. I'm fine, Luffy. She nodded in acknowledgement, but fury still burned bright inside her. At Crocodile, at him. Who did he think he was anyways? I'm going after him. She jumped off the Sandora lizard, ordering the others to continue to Alabasta. The last thing she wanted was anyone else getting hurt because of her. She observed her sandy surroundings, a deep frown on her face. Crocodile had hurt Ace. He could have killed him. Crocodile, come out and fight me. There was a rush of swirling sand, and Crocodile's form seemed to materialize before her eyes, an angry and bored look on his face. Upon seeing him, memories instantly rushed up. Losing 3 fights, winning the last, a poison hook and something about water, blood. Luffy pushed these away. They weren't her memories, and she had no desire to use his to fight this battle. Just like this was her life, this was her battle. Without hesitation, she flung herself forward, flinging attacks at Crocodile left, right and center. It was nice to just let go and release everything that had been building up inside her since she had seen her father again. To not be trapped, to have some ounce of control over her own rubbery limbs. You hurt my brother and you hurt my friend. Don't think you'll get away with this. She had been so sure. So sure she could beat him, using her experience and knowledge independently. Of course, she had been a fool in thinking so. Her entire body, he had been training, had made it foreign to her. She was stronger, more resilient, but she wasn't able to control it, to tame the power. Not without his help. He, who had become comfortable in this body, in her body. Beyond that, she hadn't fought in months. Locked within her body, she had become rough in the fighting area. She couldn't even hit Crocodile, for heaven's sake. He would know. He had lived it, she had seen it. In the hours of boredom, locked within her body, as she sifted through his memories. But this was her fight, not his. Luffy struggled as she sunk in the sand, flailing her limbs every other direction. The wound in her chest opened with each movement, spilling blood until she felt someone grasp her arm. She flinched, until a familiar face swam into view as she was freed from the sand. She gazed up at Robin, feeling fondness rush through her. These were his emotions, but she didn't mind this time. Through his memories, she had come to love each and every one of his nakama. Above her, Robin sighed heavily. So I was wrong, she murmured. In that case, how? Her murmuring drifted off into silent thoughts, until the flapping of wings could be heard. Pell landed, seemingly unharmed. He watched Robin untrustingly. What do you want, woman? A small smile crept onto Robin's lips. Now, that's not a very nice tone you have there. I want you to bring this girl to the palace. As it stands, she's the only chance this nation has. After you drop her off, there's a bomb in the plaza that needs to be taken care of. Luffy landed softly before her nakama, all of which had fought a hard battle. Many were injured, covered head to toe in bruises, cuts, and blood. It hurt her to see them like this. They had all fought hard and won, and stood here as proof. She, however, had lost. But she wouldn't again. I lost, she confessed, and she could feel their eyes on her. Her wound ached as she said it, a blaring mark that showed her failure. But I won't again, I promise. Nothing Chopper or anyone else said could make Zoro wait around. He knew she could handle it. He really did trust his captain, but her actions today worried him. He had to make sure she was alright, no matter what. Zoro sighed heavily, following the trail of defeated Marines until he came to the entrance of a tunnel that looked as though it were about to collapse. Of course his captain would be in there. He raced in, not caring if the tomb did collapse. He would just cut his way out, if it came to it. Finally, he found them. Crocodile, blasted through the ceiling of the tomb, was nowhere to be found, but the other 3. Red Hawk, the black-haired woman murmured beneath her breath. She sat beside Luffy, bloodied and injured. She drained a vial into Luffy's mouth as she spoke, but, that attack. Zoro gave her a look, showing clearly that he didn't trust her, before scooping his unconscious captain up into his arms. He didn't even regard the other 2, just turned to leave. He had only gotten a few steps, however, when Luffy seemed to wake up. It took her a few seconds to process everything going on around her, before she started to panic. Zoro, the king and Robin, we can't leave them there, they'll die. Luffy started to struggle in his arms, until the cool voice floated over to them. You have nothing to worry about, Robin assured them. The devil woman herself joined them, the king of the kingdom they fought to protect draped over her shoulder. The man looked as startled as Zoro felt. After all, only mere moments ago, this woman had been their enemy, had she not? Only making him more surprised, the woman smiled brightly in a heartfelt and genuine manner. It was only a flicker, however, and she composed herself. How about you rest now? You've been through quite a lot in the past while, Captain. It took Zoro a while to comprehend what she had just said, but Luffy's eyes widened in acknowledgement first. A small smile appeared on Luffy's lips as her eyes slipped shut. Thank you, Robin. When Luffy awoke, a good 2 days later, Zoro hadn't left her side. He had been treated, but even Chopper had been unable to pull him from his captain's side. Not that the rubber girl gave him much choice, either. The moment the swordsman went to leave her, the nightmares would start up. Ace and the others came by often, but his presence seemed to be more soothing, seconded only by Ace. When she woke up, however, he knew something was off. She sat up, looking around groggily, and wiping her eyes. And then she spotted him. Zoro. He had closed his eyes, leaning back in the chair he pulled up, but even he knew peace was impossible at this point. She pouted for a moment, before trying again. Zuru. She had waited this long for this, and she could feel him stirring within her. She knew in mere moments, her consciousness would soon be smothered by his presence. She was sick of it. For months, she had lived silently and powerlessly within her own body, his power far too much. She fought at first, but he didn't notice her. So she slept. Somewhat. She was still present. She saw what he saw, lived what he lived, felt herself grow tangled in his memories and the love they both had for their nakama. She had hated it, resented him at first. Because of him, she had no control of her own fate. But then, Logatown had happened. She had seen her father, for the first time since he had taken Sabo away, she had seen him and she had gotten through. Luffy didn't know she was there, it seemed, until that point. But everything clicked and she felt his confusion and rage and hurt and regret. She understood. She didn't forgive him. This body was still hers, and while he may have been her in another life, he would never be her in this one, never belong in this world the way she did. What do you want, Lu? He was cut off as her lips suddenly pressed against his. Usual of his captain, she had jumped into it with no warning, and was anything but gentle. Her lips moved against his, and he felt his hands come up on her sides. He gave a gentle push, careful of her injuries. Ignoring the way his lips tingled, the way he definitely wanted more of his captain, he gave her a hard look. What the hell, Luffy? She pouted up at him, a look similar to that of a kicked puppy, and he stared back. Zoro decided she was definitely still being loopy, that the poison was definitely still in her system. There was no way his captain, oblivious as she was, would come out and kiss Haim just like that. Blunt and reckless, she might be, but this was pushing it. You're still tired from the poison or something. Go back to sleep. Luffy's eyes saddened, that way he knew it would be impossible to say no to. No, I'm not, she said defiantly, her hand reaching up and hooking into her first mate's shirt's collar. I just really wanna kiss Zoro. The second time she pulled him forward for a kiss, he didn't resist. This one was different from the first. Still rushed and not at all careful, her lips moved against his as her fingers tightened around his shirt. She pulled him in closer, his own hands pressing against her hips as she opened her mouth. Yo, is Luffy awake yet? Dinner is. Zoro instantly broke the kiss, both pirates turning to face the third, one with a grin and the other with an almost horrified expression. Ace, you're okay. Long time no see, did you say food? Really? Luffy cheered, hopping from the bed in one fluid motion. She ran forward, tackling Ace in a hug that had far too much energy in it for how hurt she had been up until this point. Ace, I'm so glad you're okay. I'm gonna eat now, I'll see you there, right? He nodded, and the captain raced out of the room, laughter ringing down the hallway as she went, and leaving the two pirates. Zoro stood, watching Ace and wondering what he would do. He moved towards the door with little to no response from the whitebeard pirate. Finally, when Ace remained quiet, he spoke up. She'll eat everything if you don't hurry up. He went to step past the protective brother. A flaming hand stopped him. She won't talk to me, but she's been through a lot since I left. She's changed in ways I never imagined my little sister could change. She's growing up and she's seen so much pain. If Zoro was expecting anything, this wasn't it. He stepped back, and the flame stopped. Zoro took the opportunity to turn his gaze to the pirate's face. Ace looked more than a little hurt and confused, but his face was surprisingly void of anger. I don't know what happened to her, but I know she will do anything in her power to protect you all, regardless of the cost. She might not ever tell me what happened. She might not tell you. But she loves you. I've never seen Luffy look at anyone the way she looks at you. You know Luffy, there's no stopping her and I'm not going to try. Just protect my baby sister, and don't go dying on her, okay? Zoro paused, looking at Ace in complete bewilderment. Then, a smirk spread across his face. Ace was never something he feared. Big brother, no problem. He didn't need Ace's acceptance, acknowledgement. It was Luffy's that he needed. Over time, he had come to know his captain well. He could read her face, her emotions, even if he didn't know what exactly was going on in that head of hers. He had been surprised with what she had just done. Zoro snorted, crossing his arms. Luffy's the only one who can tell me what to do. Still, I'll protect her. Quote. He turned and walked out of the room, pausing in the doorway. Besides, if I died on her, she'd probably follow me to the next life. There's no peace with a captain like her. Robin was confused, something that was rather odd for her. The woman had been allowed into the castle to join the festivities after they discovered she had not only saved the king from the crumbling tomb, but was also one of the Straw Hat Pirates. The crew itself seemed to regard her with distrust, which was to be expected. She made no move against them, however, and Chopper eventually wandered forward to attend to her wounds. Besides that, she seemed to walk around the castle, not speaking to anyone, and remaining close to Luffy's room. So when the girl had burst down the hallway, she had definitely been taken by surprise. Halfway down the hall, Luffy spotted her and came to a complete stop, frozen in her spot. Robin, what are you doing here? She asked, confusion covering her face. You'll be in trouble, if they find you. Robin, you need to. You don't remember? Robin asked, tilting her head, before offering Luffy a small smile. The captain in question just continued to look at her in confusion. Perhaps she had made a mistake. She sighed. Luffy, I don't know why, but it seems that I have come back, in time, or perhaps into a different universe. In my world, we were nakama. I was. You remember. Like Bon-chan. The outburst was so sudden, her eyes met the captain's in shock. Luffy was pale, looking worried. You, actually, remember. Robin froze. What caused her captain to act like that? If anything, she expected to be met with confusion similar to her own. Perhaps, Luffy had something to do with why they were here. But that would be ridiculous. Luffy had. She remembered each moment in painful detail. It wasn't fair, for her and everyone to be so close to their dreams, for her to have finally found friends, family even, only to have them torn away. I remember everything up until falling unconscious at your execution. Do you know why this happened? Luffy shook her head. No clue. Luffy said, clearly lying. Robin didn't push it. If Luffy didn't wish to talk about it, there was no way she could force her, after all. But she needed, to learn more. Luffy was quick to change the topic. But it's good, right? This way we can definitely protect our nakama better. Robin sighed, before nodding and smiling. Yes, I suppose we can. For the rest of the night, Luffy stayed rather close to Robin. Seeing the trust their captain had in the ex-Baroque agent had the pirates trusting the stranger much more. Sanji, of course, was more than willing to accept yet another beautiful woman into their crew. Zoro was the only one who seemed truly hesitant and untrusting. Nay, so much has changed already, Luffy told Robin later as they sat in the bathroom. The captain closed her eyes and smiled as Robin ran her fingers through her long hair, spreading the bubbly soap. As she washed Luffy's hair, the girl continued to ramble about the adventures she had up until they reunited, and Robin was just glad to have Luffy back. She had grown so fond of her crew, only to lose them, and wake up without them once again. Are the others aware of our situation? Robin asked when the girl finally fell quiet for a few minutes. The girl tensed slightly, before wildly shaking her head. The movement sent bubbles flying everywhere, and Robin laughed as she grabbed the rubbery girl and forced her to calm down. Okay, why not? Luffy froze at that. She just couldn't tell them what she had done. But at the same time, she really didn't have much of an excuse after all. Not one that could get past Robin, at least. I don't want them to know, she admitted, her eyes downcast. Besides, what's the point of worrying them? Robin sighed, her hands resuming the washing of Luffy's hair. Her eyes found Vivi and Nami, laughing and washing each other, in complete ease. You know you need to tell them, eventually. You can't hide something like this forever. Luffy ducked her head, out of Robin's grasp. She didn't want to be reminded of that. It hurt just thinking about the day, let alone telling them what she had done. After all, if she told them about their situation, she would have to admit what she had done. Perhaps she never would, either. I know. But right now, I'm just glad I can have you all by my side, a little longer. Robin grew worried at Luffy's tone and her words. But instead of bringing it to attention, she simply nodded and smiled again. I can't wait to see Frankie and Brook again. The mention of their nakama brightened Luffy's spirits immensely, and she settled back again for Robin to continue washing her hair. She resumed her light-hearted chat of everything that had happened, and when Robin rinsed her hair, Luffy had finally reached talking about meeting Vivi again. She moved onto her back, the scars that covered Luffy not escaping her notice, but neither of them mentioning it. Luffy broke off mid-rant, surprising Robin so much she paused. Luffy, are you okay? What happened to Crocodile? I don't remember anything, Luffy said, looking beyond panicked. The note her voice had taken seemed to startle Vivi and Nami, who looked up in concern. Robin waved them off. It's fine. Everything worked out well, Robin said with a quiet laugh. You weren't nearly as injured. But your fight with Crocodile is what tipped me off. You used Red Hawk to send Crocodile flying. Luffy tilted her head, turning to look at Robin with a pout. I don't remember anything, but if it all worked out okay. Robin looked, if anything, more curious. What do you remember? Luffy pondered the question for a minute, thinking back as far as she could remember. Ace. Crocodile attacked Ace and used him to get to me. It worked, and then. I don't remember anything until I woke up and. Luffy drifted off, her face turning the most interesting shade of red that Robin had ever seen on her captain. And, she prompted. Luffy murmured something under her breath that Robin was quite sure she didn't hear properly. What did you say? When Luffy repeated herself, Robin was quite sure Luffy's face was about set on fire. Well, not me, but the other Luffy, kissed Zoro. I don't know why but I wanted to, and I kissed him again and then I ran out when Ace came in and I just don't know. Robin lifted her finger and shushed the girl. Shish, it's alright. Luffy frowned, apparently thinking the exact opposite. But I kissed Zoro, Robin. Now he probably hates me and even if he doesn't, it'd only be because of this body that he wants to kiss me. Do you really believe that, Luffy? This time, Robin frowned. She sighed before shaking her head when Luffy gave her a clueless look. I'm surprised you never noticed. Luffy cocked her head. What are you talking about? Oh, Luffy, Robin sighed, what are you feeling for him? Luffy looked startled by the question. What are my feelings? He's my swordsman, and my best friend, I guess. And my nakama, of course. And, Luffy repeated, her face flushing further and a pout on her lips. You said you wanted to kiss him again. And I did. And I liked it. So what? Luffy ducked her head into her knees, and Robin almost looked exasperated. Luffy was moody and emotional on a good day, but a female Luffy was almost twice as bad. It seems that mentally being male didn't change the estrogen levels at all. It doesn't mean anything if Zoro. You haven't even let him say anything about it, Robin pointed out, now understanding why Luffy seemed to avoid Zoro like the plague that evening, conveniently sitting between Ace and herself through dinner, clinging to Robin. Besides, the body you're in changes nothing. I'm surprised that you never noticed before. Zoro's feelings have always been glaringly obvious, to all but you, it seems. She paused. Not that he would admit it. Luffy looked at Robin, feeling beyond confused. Zoro had cared about her, even before she became a woman. But then, it did make sense. She flushed again, scolding herself for acting so girly. Robin offered her a small smile. And you care deeply for your first mate too, don't you? Luffy nodded numbly, seemingly shocked by the sudden truth. She stood abruptly, clenching her fist as she posed in a determined stance. I have to apologize. Perhaps after bathing, now isn't really the best time, Luffy. She was cut off as Luffy ran forward, not hesitating in the least as she launched herself over the wall separating the baths. It all happened in bad timing, really. Just as all the men, save Zoro and Ace, climbed the wall to sneak a peek, Luffy blasted herself over it, giving them more than an eyeful. The men released the wall in surprise and fell instantly into the water beneath them. Zoro! Luffy shouted, landing somewhat awkwardly on the wet floor before falling on her face. She didn't even have a chance to recover before thick steam seemed to fill the room, a familiar grip wrapped around her waist, and she was dragged from the bathing chamber. You idiot! Ace growled, grabbing a nearby towel and wrapping it around his little sister, whom he had dumped unceremoniously onto her feet. Honesty, I don't care if they're your nakama. Baths should be kept separate. But I used to bath with you and Sabo all the time. She didn't even know why she said this. Of course he had, when he was a man, but he wasn't actually sure if she did. Not that it mattered, really. Luffy, that was years ago. Last time we had a bath together was when you were 13. 14. Luffy pouted, not at all satisfied with his answer. Ace sighed and grabbed two more towels. One he wrapped around himself and the other he threw over Luffy's head, effectively blocking the pout. You probably burnt everyone up with the steam, she pointed out, her voice slightly muffled by the towel. It lacked the bite her earlier words had disappeared, it seemed, her original goals completely forgotten. Instead, she basked happily in her brother's attention. They'll survive, I'm sure. Your nakama are rather resilient. Ace laughed, reaching out and ruffling the towel as to dry her hair. He could see her lips turn up in a grin as he spoke. But that's not surprising. They have to be, to survive dealing with you. That's not very nice, Ace. Luffy said, mockingly offended at his words. Her grin hadn't disappeared. Ace was different, sure. That was almost to be expected, since he was looking after a little sister rather than a little brother. You should cut your hair. It's gotten wild since I left, Ace finally muttered, pulling the towel away and carting his fingers through the dark mane. Remember when Sabo used to cut it for you? Then I tried to take over after he left and nearly cut off all your hair. She wanted to say no, but as she thought about it, the pictures formed in her mind and she seemed to remember them in perfect clarity. She nodded and grinned, the picture of Ace all flustered from screwing up still in her mind. I got angry, but I still couldn't beat you up. Bet I could now. You really haven't changed that much. Ace laughed. With such simple words, dread settled in her stomach. She had changed. A lot. Considering that she wasn't even the same person. She tensed when his hands rested on her shoulders, directly above her scars. Would he realize that not only was she not his sister, but he was a stranger who had stolen his sister from him? There was a pause before Ace spoke again. Luffy, these scars. Who? It's nothing, she said quickly, too quickly, cutting him off. Please, Ace. Everyone gets hurt fighting, right? Yeah, he agreed, not as all satisfied with the answer, but well aware that Luffy was in no mood to tell him anything. Perhaps, just maybe, Sabo would get some answers. He had always been the better of the two at dealing with her moods, after all. Ace had never managed to get a crying and distraught Luffy to shut up, but Sabo. Let's get dressed. Luffy was more than happy at the change in subject. She nodded, grinning at Ace once again. She threw the towel from her hair on the ground, wrapping her own towel tightly around her. Ace was already dressed, much to her surprise. She hadn't even noticed him grab his clothes. Hey, Ace. He hummed in response as they made their way for the women's room so Luffy could change. You should cut my hair tonight. Chapter 11, The Nicer Brother. For a long time, Luffy sat staring at the X on her arm. Already, she missed Vivi. It had been so long since she had seen her, but their reunion had been short. With the knowledge that she would most likely never see the princess again, she wanted nothing more than to stay by her side, just a little longer, but that was impossible. Bon Chan had been able to protect Mary and eventually distract the Marines, but they were still on a tight schedule. Nay, I hope Bon Chan is alright, Luffy sighed, hanging herself over the upper rail of the ship, watching Alabasta disappear before her eyes slowly. He really helped us out. Damn Okama bastard, why should it matter if he's alright? Sanji muttered angrily beneath his breath. Only moments earlier, he too had been slung over the railing as he cried at their departure. The fact that Bon Chan had showed up hadn't helped him any, as he was still sore at nearly losing to the man. When he received no answer, Sanji straightened. I'm going to make supper. Ace, from where he had been standing back against the cabin, stepped forward. Any way I help? Sanji glanced at Ace. He didn't really trust anyone else in his kitchen and Ace was related to Luffy. Surely it couldn't end well. Then again, Ace was already extremely different from his energetic sister. Come on, I'm intruding on this ship, the least I could do is help out in some way. Why not? Sanji agreed after a few moments. Luffy's face fell immediately. But Ace, she whined, drawing his name out much longer than need be, her lip jutting into a pout. You don't have to, why not play with me? Ace laughed, reaching over to ruffle Luffy's now short hair. We have plenty of time until we reach the next island, go play with someone else. Truth be told, as much as Ace adored his sister and reveled in her attention, even he needed a break. He had been the one who had to soothe the saddened captain when Vivi declined the offer to join. He followed Sanji into the kitchen, ignoring Luffy who crossed her arms and instantly turned away to find something fun to do. Chopper is making rumble balls and Usopp is working on Nami's Klima thingy. Nami's working on her maps. Sanji is cooking and Ace is helping him. Robin is reading and probably doesn't want to be disturbed. This isn't fair, she muttered to herself as she walked, subconsciously finding her way to where Zoro was training. It wasn't rare for her to hang around the swordsman as he trained. More often than not, she could be found training next to him. However, when his eyes flickered to meet hers, Luffy felt an odd heat creep across her face. She realized with a start that this was the first time that had been alone since the kiss the other night. She still hadn't been able to say anything. She sat back instead of joining him this time, opting to watch this time. The quiet was, surprisingly, nice. The air was void of the awkwardness she expected. There was nothing that needed said, not at that moment. What's up, Luffy? Zoro asked, dropping the weight to shift and look at her. You're being awfully quiet. Luffy grinned up at her first mate. I want to teach you something. Whatever he was expecting, that wasn't it. Teach him something. It wasn't that he doubted her strength, but she didn't exactly fight with swords. Oh, she climbed to her feet, moving towards him until she stopped right in front of him. She held her arm out straight. Try to cut me. Zoro looked at her incredulously. Swords were a rubber person's weakness, the one thing that could hurt them, surely she didn't want him to. Luffy, just do it, captain's orders. She said, a cheeky smile on her face as his fell. What the hell was his captain trying to get at? Hesitantly, he unsheathed Yubashiri, raised it silently, before bringing it down over her outstretched arm. Just before the metal came in contact with her shoulder, a shiny black covered her protectively. The sword struck it, but instead of slicing through the rubbery flesh, it was stopped instantly. What the hell? Zoro muttered, removing his sword from her shoulder and putting it back in the sheath as he watched the black armor fade. Armament Haki, Luffy stated with a huge grin. She brushed off her shoulder as if there were something there, and all traces of the armor disappeared. There are 3 types of Haki, and this is one of them. There's Armament, which is like an invisible shield, Observation, that helps you predict people's moves and stuff, and King's Haki. But you can only unlock 2 of them, so I'm going to teach you. Zoro, having never expected that he would actually get a lesson in, well, anything, from his captain, was rather impressed. Yeah, Luffy nodded eagerly. Since she had come to this universe, her Haki was nowhere near as powerful as it had once been. Then again, this body was untrained. Of course, now that she had the knowledge and control of her power, she only had to master it in this form. She was quite positive that all the training she had done up until this point at least had her caught up with about a year of Rayleigh's training. So how's this work? Luffy's mouth dropped open. She hadn't exactly thought that far ahead. Really, Rayleigh had just smacked him around until he opened up his senses and eventually learned how to dodge and condense his Haki into a shield. Zoro laughed when he saw the puzzled look on her face and she quickly snapped her mouth shut. Don't laugh. Here, gimme your bandana. She ordered with a pout. Falling silent, he untied and handed her his bandana without question. She tied it around her own eyes. Okay, now try to hit me. Zoro didn't bother to question her this time, and instantly lunged forward with Yubashiri. Not to his surprise, Luffy dodged with ease. He tried again and with the smallest sidestep, she managed to dodge again. And again, and again. Show off, Zoro finally muttered, the lunges coming to a stop as he sheathed his sword once more. Luffy pushed up the bandana, grinning childishly up at Zoro. The person who taught me just whacked me around, till I figured it out, she admitted, reaching up to untie the bandana. Zoro had it easy. He meditated enough whilst studying the sword, he already in tune with his surroundings. Under Hawkeye's watch, he had easily mastered it. But I'm sure Zoro will pick it up really quickly. Just, try to sense your surroundings. Alright. Zoro rolled his eyes, taking the bandana from her and tying it over his eyes, a determined look on his face. He stood, arms crossed. Gimme your best shot. And so she did. With the single punch, he was sent stumbling off to the side. He quickly caught himself, steadying his footing on the deck and straightening once more. He took a deep breath, listening for Luffy. He heard nothing and the next punch came before he could expect it. The next half an hour passed repetitively like this, with little to no progress at all. Zoro had only managed to dodge one of 2 shots, but that was likely due to how predictable Luffy was. Zoro rubbed irritably at what would soon be a bruise on his side. When the next attack came, he instinctively reached out and actually managed to catch Luffy's rubbery fist. Zoro, you did it. Luffy cheered, launching herself towards Zoro. This, he did not see coming and soon found himself in the compromising position of being sprawled out beneath his excited captain. He pushed up the bandana to see her grinning down at him. Luffy, of course, did not think of their position at all at first. All she could think about was the fact that Zoro had managed to catch her attack. Perhaps she could start to train Sanji as well. He needed to know too, after all. It would be the best she could do to prepare them for the future. The future that she would have no place in. No matter what path her crew chose when Ayum claimed her, whether it be separating or sticking together, they needed to be prepared. If she could even give them the smallest head start. Maybe if I got you and Sanji to fight each other blindfolded. It wouldn't be too hard and maybe you'd fight less if. She was cut off as Zoro abruptly flipped them over, pinning her beneath him. She looked up at him, confused. An adorable flush spread across Luffy's face as she took in the look on Zoro's face. Zoro, what? Whatever else she planned to say was cut off as Zoro leant down and claimed her lips with his own. It was completely different than their previous kisses when led by Zoro. He was slow, sensual, but still needy. He moved his lips against hers, urging her lips open. She did do willingly, reaching up to tangle her fingers in short green hair. When he pulled out of the kiss, he was smirking. She grinned up at him, giggling with a giddiness she had never really felt firsthand before. Her cheeks were flushed and she let out a short breath. She had never actually ended up talking to Zoro that night, telling him what she had intended to. Apparently, no words were necessary. She shouldn't be surprised. There was a reason that Zoro was her first mate, after all. Zoro. The way she practically whined his name really shouldn't have been that appealing, but it was. His smirk grew and she drew him down for another short kiss. I like kissing Zoro. Instead of answering, he moved as if to kiss her once more. Nami Swan. Robin-chan. Luffy-chan. Dinner is ready. Zoro wasn't sure how he should feel with the knowledge that food always came before anything else. Is it just me, or is Luffy sticking closer to Zoro than usual? Robin looked up at the navigator's words. Her eyes held a dangerous glint trained on the 2 on the deck in question. Robin followed the gaze, seeing Luffy clinging to Zoro's back and demanding a piggyback ride. She had attempted previously to do so to Ace, but was painfully rejected and left to sulk off to her first mate who definitely could not tell her no. Perhaps, Robin said with a mysterious smile, sipping at her coffee and returning her eyes to the book in her lap. But then, it's not unusual for a first mate to be close to his captain, is it? Nami gave a tired sigh, watching them a while longer before growing bored with their antics. I suppose. But I swear, yesterday while they were all training, I was showing Ace my maps. He has much better senses than his sister, I'll tell you that. Anyways, when we came out, they were curled up together on the deck. No one can calm Luffy down, let alone get her to sleep like that. Robin smiled and nodded her head as she let Nami ramble on about her suspicions. She didn't need to hear it, she had seen it too. She was fairly sure everyone had, but no one was about to mention it. It was much nicer to watch the relationship between the captain and first mate bloom before her eyes. She was sure she wasn't the only one, and Nami's interest only proved it. Robin let a smile creep onto her lips, letting her thoughts wander. The trip to Jaya went rather peacefully as opposed to the first time Robin had traveled this route, though she sensed a deep sense of dread within her captain. The girl might put on a big smile, but it was easy for Robin, who had spent so many years at sea with her, to tell. It wasn't hard to tell what about either. With Ace traveling with them, the potential of meeting Blackbeard at this next island could be destructive. Luffy wasn't ready to part with her brother either. Still, her brave captain seemed to push the worst of these thoughts away as per usual, and decided to make the most of the 2 weeks at sea. Robin would often catch the girl spending time with her brother, dragging him into games of tag and hide and seek, fighting with him playfully, and generally clinging to him. The other half of her time was dedicated solely to balancing her new relationship with the swordsman, training Zoro and Sanji, or trying to mooch food from the latter. Luffy really didn't seem to mind exploiting her new body for the prospect of food. Zoro on the other hand, The man in question suddenly appeared on the upper deck. The girl clinging to his neck with one arm was pointing at Nami with her free hand. Nami, Nami, I want a tangerine. Nami's eyes suddenly lost the dreamy look they held when she thought of the dramatics of the unfolding romance on the ship. Instead, it was replaced with a harsh gleam. At this point, Zoro sensed his debt crisis could only get worse if he got sucked into this, and dropped Luffy to the ground without warning. The captain let out a shocked cry, landing on her butt and pouting up at her first mate. It lasted less than half a minute and she quickly bounced back to her feet. Come on, just one, Nami, please. Luffy pleaded, looking at him with the cutest expression Robin had ever seen on her captain. It was true Luffy had been a rather cute boy, no matter how much that offended his pride as a man, but that was nothing compared to how she looked now. Her softer features, whiter eyes, and shaggy hair that peeked out beneath her hat. Robin chuckled, sensing Nami would quickly break in her resolve to protect her tangerines. Fine, you can have one, Nami agreed, much to everyone's surprise. Luffy herself froze in shock. If you take a bath. Right now. Robin smiled at this, watching as Luffy's face fell in horror. Despite being a girl now, some things really hadn't changed. Luffy's need to only shower approximately once a week appeared to be one of them. Multiple times, Nami had been reduced to bribing the Straw Hat Captain. More often than not, the promise of a tangerine-themed dessert, the only food Luffy didn't immediately shove down the hatch but instead forced herself to enjoy, seemed to do the trick. This was no exception. She was still looking put out, but looked slightly hopefully as she asked, "Can Sanji make it a yummy dessert with ice cream and chocolate like last time?" Nami sighed, before agreeing. It was the least she could do if the girl was actually willing to bathe. Luffy hadn't stopped her own training even with training Zoro and Sanji. She had easily become just as sweaty and gross as the boys. Sure, Sanji didn't mind as he fawned over her, she was a woman, after all, and Zoro definitely didn't mind, being in a similar state regularly. Nami, however, had to sleep in the same cabin when Luffy didn't wander off in the night to join Ace or Zoro and would rather not smell the residue of the last week's training. Okay, let's go bathe together, the captain said, enthusiasm renewed with the promise of food. She grabbed Nami's hand, eagerly pulling her away before anyone else could get a word in edgewise. Robin smiled after the two girls, still not entirely used to her captain being a woman. Zoro lingered a few moments, watching after them with an almost relieved expression on his face. It seemed that after a day of being forced into piggybacks and hide-and-seek, even the first mate couldn't quite keep up with the eccentric and energetic captain. He turned, probably to head back the way he came. Wait, Zoro. He stopped at the sound of his name. When he turned around, nothing could have really prepared her for the glare she received from the first mate. She should have expected it. Zoro had never really trusted her until after the events at Eni's lobby. He had no reason to trust her anymore at this point in time either. She put on her best smile, pretending that seeing the look on the face of someone who had become so dear to her didn't hurt. You would do anything for Luffy, wouldn't you? He stiffened completely, probably taking it as a threat. His eyes hardened, and Robin thought she might have overstepped her boundaries. She gazed at him unflinchingly, knowing that if she dared close her eyes she would remember that day. She didn't want to see her nakama in such a state, even if it was just in her mind. What's it matter? He said shortly, not willing to really give much more of an answer. His entire stance told her he was suddenly on guard, willing to fight. If you're trying to find a weak point, it won't work. I don't trust you, and Luffy knows it. Robin sighed, closing the book in her lap before leaning to rest her chin on her folded fingers. Love isn't a weakness, it is a strength. Zoro hadn't expected that, she could tell. His stance didn't waver, but his expression dropped the hard edge. I used to think love was a weakness. Running for years, there was no one I could truly trust. Loving someone was out of the question, for there was only betrayal and pain. Robin smiled. It was sad and distant, flashes of that day playing through her mind. She remembered her own tears as her nakama fell, her completely helpless as she watched. And then Luffy came along. With Luffy, love will never be a weakness. By the end of her speech, Zoro had somewhat relaxed, but still looked untrusting. His hand had left his sheathed sword. She smiled upon seeing this, although she had a long way to go before he began to trust her. TCH. Why are you telling me this? When he received no answer, he turned to walk away from Robin. He was halfway down the steps when he finally got the reply. Because I would do anything for her as well. I don't want to go, Luffy pouted, stomping her foot on the ground stubbornly to show just how unwilling she was. It was this island that she first met Blackbeard, that she had argued with him. And now, with Ace at her side, they expected her to march right into a battle that her crew were far from ready for. You can't make me. Come on, you love exploring. What makes this island any different? Nami exclaimed, whacking the girl in the head when she turned her head away from the navigator. The captain whistled loudly, pointedly ignoring the orange-haired woman's muttering. It didn't take much of this for Nami to lose her temper. Luffy, we need to find out why the log pose is pointing up, so we have to go figure out what's going on. Obviously we have to go up to Sky Island, Luffy stated as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. This only seemed to make Nami all the more irritated, and she stormed away after making sure to leave a large bump growing on Luffy's head. Ace had had enough of this and stepped forward, rolling his eyes when Luffy instantly clung to him and started crying about how unfair Nami was being. "Don't look at me, you're the captain," Ace muttered, but kissed it better, anyways, if only to please his little sister. After that, however, he was all business. "Either way, you don't have much choice. We have to go into town if you want your surprise." The prospect of her surprise seemed to wipe all other thoughts from her head. Only moments later, she was standing on the dock and waving at them eagerly. Come on, we have to go. I want to see my surprise. Come on guys," Luffy called impatiently, rocking back and forth as she waited for the others to join her. Sanji stayed behind to guard the ship and make a list of what they needed to stock up on, but the others soon joined her. "Hurry," Nami let out a huff of breath, rolling her eyes at her captain's behavior. Of course after being bribed, she would give in so easily. Then again, Nami figured it was nearly impossible for Luffy to tell her brother, no. At least, not if she wanted to remain unscathed. "Fine, after your surprise, we have to go find information about the log pose. I already told you, we have to go up. The island is clearly up there." Luffy flailed as if to prove her point. "That's impossible." "No, it isn't. How would you know?" Luffy faltered half a second before Robin came to her rescue. "The captain is correct. I have read from multiple sources of an islands in the sky. Getting there, however, would be the problem." Nami looked horrified by the very concept. "Well, we don't have to go. We can wait here until the log pose." "No, we're going to Sky Island." Nami really should have guessed. There was no way that Luffy of all people would risk missing an adventure like that. It was the sky, for heaven's sake. Even she was curious, but not enough to die trying to get there. However, at this point, she didn't even bother argue. She would do plenty of that later after they what exactly getting to the Sky Islands entitled. Luffy, seemingly happy to have won this round, sped her pace to catch up with Ace. She launched herself forward, wrapping her arms and legs around his neck and torso and clinging to him as she giggled. "So what's here, Ace? Is it food? You remembered that I don't like cherry pie, right? It's not cherry pie, is it?" Luffy rambled on, loud and unyielding, directly in his ears. Laughing, he humored her ranting until they finally arrive at the small pub in the center of town. Upon seeing it, Luffy abruptly fell silent. She didn't let go of Ace, however, until the small band of pirates stepped into the pub. At first, Ace simply peered around until he seemed to find what he was looking for. "Oi," he called, waving wildly. Ace quickly made his way towards the bar, where a single man sat alone, sipping on his bottle of sake. Luffy's mouth fell open, and in one movement, she released her grip on Ace and stumbled to regain her footing. Zoro caught her as the memories washed over her, this time surprisingly welcome. Luffy couldn't stop the tears from coming. Despite being a rubber person, she had gotten so roughed up. She was bleeding and it hurt to move, and no matter how she tried the tears just wouldn't stop. "You're such a cry baby," Ace yelled at her, only prompting the girl to cry harder. "And a weakling. I hate weaklings and cry babies, so I definitely hate you." Luffy continued to sob, but it was clear she was trying her best to quell the non-stop tears. She rubbed at her eyes and then her running nose with her shirt, before finally muttering, "Thank you." The two older kids shared a confused look before she continued. "I thought I was gonna die. Thank you for saving me." This only seemed to feed Ace's unexplained anger towards the young girl. He all but lunged forward with an angry growl, "Why you?" It was Sabo who caught Ace's shirt, dragging him back and waiting for him to calm down. "She's just thanking us, Ace. Why didn't you just tell them?" Ace shouted, surprising the other two children greatly. "Those guys just kill women and children without a second thought. You're no exception." Luffy sniffled again, the tears seeming to finally stop. Instead, she was left hiccuping as her nose continued to run. "If I told them, you wouldn't want to be my friend anymore. And that's better than dying. Why would you want to be my friend anyway?" Because, if. After everything I put you through. Why did you still follow me out this far?" "Because there isn't anybody else." The three children froze at the confession. It wasn't entirely true. She had her parents and her grandpa. But kids her own age. The children at Fushia village didn't like her much. "I'm stuck here for the summer with mountain bandits and I can't go back to Fushia. I'm all alone if I didn't have you. Being alone is far worse than being hurt by any scary guy." "What about your parents?" Ace asked after many moments passed in semi-silence. Luffy ducked her head. "They're busy. They leave me here for the summer but the visits are getting longer. It's dangerous on a ship. So they don't want me there. And Grandpa is a crazy jerk." Ace paused again, a small frown had reappeared, but it was less angry than the previous ones. "Perhaps a little jealous, if nothing else. But you like it when I'm here. Right?" Luffy agreed with a nod, seemingly glad that he had gotten the point. "And it'd be bad if I wasn't here." Ace continued hesitantly, as if afraid of the answer. So you want me to live Little Luffy looked quite surprised by this question. What are you talking about? Of course I do. Ace was silent, but he turned around to face the other way. I see, was all he said as he hid his expression from the young girl. But I still hate stupid, spoilt kids like you. Luffy jumped to her feet, all anger disappearing. I'm not spoilt. Of course you are. Look at you, crying like a big baby. I was punched with a spiked glove. And I'm only 7. When I'm 10, I won't cry at all. It quickly dissolved into fighting, the two jumping and ready to fight. It was obvious who would win at this point, but Sabo came to her rescue. She helped us out, Ace, leave her alone. We have other problems to worry about. Luffy sat back smugly as Sabo treated her wounds with care, ignoring Ace's sulking in the background. XXX. The three kids were sitting casually on the beach when the huge ship arrived. One, visibly shaking in such a way that it seemed almost impossible to get her to calm down. One, seemingly happy to see her in such a state, and the last boy, sulking angrily. What's this about, anyways? Ace asked, crossing his arms across his chest. I don't want to meet your dad. I need to tell him something and I want you to be here, Luffy explained, subconsciously copying the kid who had recently become a brother to her. She peered out, watching the small rowboat be lowered down and make its way towards the shore. Besides, we're brothers now. Idiot, we're your brothers, you're our sister. Luffy continued as though she hadn't heard Ace's interruption, so my dad is kinda like your dad. Ace stiffened at the very thought. I don't want a dad. Uncle, maybe. Luffy pondered, oblivious to the danger that was her angry brother. Why you little? Ace, calm down, Sabo said quickly, bringing the fight to an abrupt stop before it had even really started. Ever the peacekeeper, he was. The fact she wants to share her family with us should mean something. Ace grumbled, dropping back in the sand and staring at the sky as he ignored the other two. Luffy, on the other hand, jumped to her feet and dragged Sabo along with her. She stumbled into the water despite being unable to swim and fell face first into the water. Sabo sighed before pulling her back up, coughing and sputtering and clinging to him for dear life. The two stood in the water for a fair amount of time until the boat finally drew close enough. The three people inside the boat climbed out, and Luffy stumbled through the water until she could cling to her father's wet form. He hoisted the 7-year-old up, holding her close as he waded through the water towards shore. Dad, you have to meet Sabo and Ace. They're my brothers now. Gramps left me with some mountain bandits for the summer, can you believe him, and I met Ace. Ace is really cool but he's mean, and Sabo's really nice but. She continued to ramble off, Dragon entertaining his daughter with a small smile. Sabo had returned to shore and was sitting with Ace, watching the exchange with a small frown. Dragon placed his daughter down once they were on the beach, and she instantly hopped forwards towards Ace and Sabo. Hands on hips, she turned to her dad and grinned. Dad, I have an amendment to make. This seemed to pique everyone's interest, even Ace, who sat up behind Sabo to look at his baby sister. Announcement, Luffy, Dragon corrected gently. Ah, yeah, sorry, Dad, Luffy said with a laugh. She poised herself, as if to say something dramatic. I've decided to stay on Fuchsia. I don't want to leave Sabo or Ace, so I'm going to stay here and keep training. This news threw everyone for a loop. Ace and Sabo were expecting Luffy to leave for another year, probably what had put Ace in a bad mood in the first place, but this. Ace laid back down, trying to hide the smile that crept up upon his face. Sabo himself looked just as, if not more, relieved. After all, even if neither would admit it, they didn't want to part with their baby sister. Not yet. You haven't even started training your hockey yet. I'll do it here, with Ace and Sabo. But I'm not leaving unless you bring them along. Dragon chuckled. His daughter, stubborn as always. Very well, I won't try to change your mind. XXX. What are you doing here, Dad? Luffy asked as she boarded the ship, Ace right behind her. Their trio was short by one, Sabo having returned to his family. Yeah, why do you want us here, Austin? Ace asked rudely. Dragon paid him little attention, but instead watched the waters with a dangerous look. Where's that other kid, Sabo? He went back to his parents, Ace said, venom in his tone as he mentioned Sabo's family. Dragon had no doubt that was directed towards him just as much. He's still there, right? Both children looked confused by the question. They had no time to answer when suddenly the sound of explosions went off from the direction of the gray terminal. It wasn't long until thick smoke filled the air along with the smell of fire. Luffy's eyes started to water immediately, and she only managed to hold the tears back so long. Dragon ended up dragging her down into the ship, leaving Ace to watch the terminal burn. XXX. When Luffy finally resurfaced from below the ship, Ace had barely moved. Dragon and Ace were talking in hushed tones when Luffy stepped out, and instantly fell silent. Luffy pushed through the crowds of people on the ship, looking more than a little confused. Many of the faces were unfamiliar, but a few she recognized from the gray terminal. Is it over? The fire is still burning, but it'll be over soon, Dragon said with only a glance over. Luffy heaved herself up onto railing and gazed at the island. She had always enjoyed this feeling, the sea breeze in her hair and the smell of salt in her nose. She crinkled her nose when the usual smell was filled with smoke. There was a few moments that passed before Luffy grew bored. Neither Dragon or Ace were talking, and she turned to look at them in confusion. Something had to have happened. Why else would they be so solemn? Nay, what happened? She whispered, her gaze going between Ace and Dragon. No one answered her, but she followed their gaze to see a small rowboat heading back towards the boat. Two men she recognized, and someone slumped between them. The form was bloody and bent awkwardly, dripping with seawater. Luffy's mouth fell open as she recognized the striking blonde hair. Sabo. Luffy cheered, almost crying as she launched herself forward. Her rubbery limbs wrapped tightly around the taller kid. Then, the tears slipped out, and just as it had been for Ace, she was crying and snotting all over. Sabo, being the much nicer big brother, made no move to pull her off but instead pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. Ace rolled his eyes, dropping down on the stool near to the reunited siblings. "How's Uncle?" Ace asked, shouting for a drink quickly before looking to Sabo for an answer. Sabo, now dabbing at Luffy's wet eyes, simply laughed in response. "Pops is fine. I'm surprised he allowed this trip though. There's a lot going on." Ace nodded as if to agree, watching as Luffy slowly unwound herself from her second brother and dodged the handkerchief. Sabo laughed again. "You haven't changed a bit, Luffy." Luffy scowled. Ace had said the exact same thing. "Have so?" Yeah, Ace replied dismissively, turning to where the rest of the Straw Hats stood in the doorway, unsure what to make of this reunion. "Why don't you introduce your crew to Sabo, Luffy?" Luffy's eyes lit up, completely forgetting that she was supposed to be upset with the two. Oh, well, she waved wildly at her crew, and the small group eventually stepped forward. Zoro was immediately at her side, the others standing back a little. Sabo himself sat up straighter. Of course he had known Zoro, the only other with a wanted poster, but the others were strangers to him yet. "That's Robin. She's super intelligent and stuff. Chopper's my reindeer doctor. How cool is that? Then there is Sanji, the cuckoo isn't here right now, and Usopp's the sharpshooter. He can hit anything and never misses. Nami is our navigator. She read any type of weather." Each crew member seemed rather pleased with their introduction and the praise from the captain. "And there's Zoro. He's gonna be the world's best swordsman. Not bad for the king of the pirates, crew, huh?" Sabo looked amused at her behavior, nodding along with her words and committing each name to memory. "Quite the crew you've got here. Pops figured you'd gather a crew like this." He swung around in his chair to grin at the group of people. "Nice to meet you. I'm Sabo, Luffy's nicer brother." Luffy tilted her head slightly. It was the other Luffy who wanted to ask, but Luffy entertained her demands. "How's Dad?" Worried about his baby girl, Sabo teased with a roll of his eyes. Dragon was well aware that his daughter was capable of taking care of herself. Still, the words did the trick and Luffy glowered at her brother. The crew seemed quite taken aback. Whatever surprise they believed Ace had, this was not it. Of course Luffy would have yet another brother to worry about. Ace's company was enjoyable enough, but they weren't sure they could handle another Luffy. Thankfully, Sabo seemed much more polite and laid back than their captain. "I keep forgetting that Luffy last saw you when she was 14, Ace said with a chuckle as he ruffled her hair. She scuttled out of his reach with a happy laugh. It was easy to see how much she absolutely adored her brothers, and how they doted on her in turn. After introductions were out of the way, it wasn't hard for the crew to fall into the siblings' celebration. Everyone had drinks, rejoicing into their reunion. It went on as such for a few hours, the trio seemingly impossible to separate. When Sabo finally rose to his feet, his cheeks slightly flushed from drinking, Luffy automatically panicked. "You aren't leaving already, are you?" she asked, jumping to her feet. There was a desperate, whining note in her voice. What kind of surprise would it be if he left already? Ace said sarcastically, pausing in what had become a drinking competition between him, Nami and Zoro. He placed his drink down as he watched the gears turning in Luffy's head. "What do you wait? Sabo was my surprise." Sabo joined Ace's laughter this time. It appeared, in the meeting with Sabo, that Luffy had completely forgotten about the surprise she had been so excited about. No matter, she hadn't been disappointed. "I'll see you soon," Sabo promised her. Ace stood, quickly forfeiting from the competition. It seemed that Zoro would be winning. He had lost count of how the man had downed, but he hadn't even shown the slightest signs of drunkenness. He threw a few bills onto the table, far more than enough to cover everyone's tabs. "I'll tag along, and see you back at the ship. I need to talk to Sabo." "Alone?" Ace suggested as Luffy let out another whine of protest. "Just let him go, Luffy," Nami snapped as both Ace and Sabo found themselves attached to two long, stretched arms. She released instantly, her arms snapping back in place as she frowned. Ace and Sabo paused in the doorway, looking almost regretful about leaving their sister. "We have to gather information anyway. Best get it done while we're here." Robin stood. "I do have a few things I need to pick up," she said. "Usopp, Chopper, would you care to join me?" Chopper, who while not completely trusting Robin, didn't seem to mind her presence as much as he had originally. It probably had to do with Luffy's complete and utter trust of the woman, and Robin's own fondness for the captain. He hopped down and made his way to her side without protest, Usopp following close behind. This left Nami, Zoro and Luffy alone for the first time that night. Nami eyed the two as though she were about to jump them. It was the first chance she had to ask questions about their blossoming relationship. Then, after a moment of hesitation, she turned away, to face the bartender. There would be time for pestering the two later. Right now, she had questions that needed answered. She opened her mouth to speak, but the bartender quickly cut her off. "You wanna know why the log poses point up?" he asked, and when she nodded, he simply scoffed. "I heard you talking about it earlier, but honestly, I'd just give it up. Unfortunately, my captain has her heart set on going up to Sky Island, so if there's any information." Nami batted her eyelashes, clearly hoping to charm information out of the man. However, she was met only by a loud bout of laughter. The door to the pub slammed shut and the laughter quelled almost immediately, the room falling silent. Nami turned, following the bartender's eyes to a blond man. He was tall, radiating cockiness as he strode towards the bar. She chose to ignore him, slamming her hands on the counter. "Do you have any information on how to get to Sky Island or not?" It wasn't the bartender who answered, but instead the blonde idiot who had just entered. "Sky Island?" the man questioned, prompting a few chuckles from the others. "Sweetheart, stuff like that is for stupid, idiotic fools." Nami scowled in reply, turning to her two crewmates for backup. She didn't receive any, as the two of them stared intently at the wall as they listened. Luffy, Zoro. She couldn't even process what exactly had happened, what had brought it on, but the man suddenly launched himself forward. With a smirk, he slammed Luffy's head down onto the counter, easily sending wood flying as the wood splintered and broke apart. Nami didn't even have time to react when a sword was unsheathed, held taut and only inches from the man's neck. "Oi, Zoro," Luffy muttered, forcing herself up. She rubbed her forehead as she stood, but otherwise seemed completely unaffected from the attack. She cast a blonde and irritated look, but before she could give another order, Bellamy was smirking again. "Huh, so the 45 mil bounty belongs to a girl?" Bellamy asked, sending her an appraising look that neither of her crewmates appreciated. Luffy, on the other hand, was oblivious as ever to the pirate's eyes on her body. "Well, I'd rather not beat up a girl. Especially not one as pretty as you. But you know, you could give up on Sky Island. Can't see a girl like you being much use in a fight. The Marines are getting rather generous, I guess. But I could keep you safe. Even if you can't fight, I'm sure there are plenty of other uses for you." That seemed to be all it took. Zoro's arm twitched, the sword moving before anyone else could process it. Luffy, however, moved faster. She stepped between them, lifting her arm and blocking the blade. She didn't even have to use haki. Zoro, sensing her movement, stopped the blade a fraction of an inch from her arm. "Luffy, it's pointless to fight here," she said, sending Bellamy another annoyed look. She gave an uncharacteristic snort of laughter. "Besides, we shouldn't be causing a scene here." Bellamy let out a growl of frustration, disliking the fact he was being ignored. "Bitch, don't just act like I'm not here." She shifted her head, turning away from Zoro and looking at the man. "You're annoying." Bellamy lifted his fist, but was abruptly stopped by one of his men. "She might be a useless dreamer, but I don't think it's wise to fight her," his crewmate muttered quickly, not releasing his arm. "She was just in here drinking with Fire Fist Ace. If she gets hurt, she might not be much, but there is no way anyone here can handle Portgas." Bellamy's face instantly curled into a bitter sneer, though there seemed to be a new hint of amusement in his eyes. "Ah, so that explains it all," he muttered. "The foolish dreams, the attitude, the bounty. After all, no one would dare lay a finger on Fire Fist Ace's toy." Luffy tilted her head, not really understanding or caring. After all, why would Ace affect anything to do with her? Her two crew members, however, let out an angry growl and stepped forward instantly, even Nami. "Oi," Luffy said, bringing the attention back to her. The two looked at her, and she slipped past them with ease. "I just said we aren't fighting them. Let's go back to the ship. I already know how we're gonna get to Sky Island." "Luffy, do you have any idea?" Nami started, before falling silent when Luffy gave her a huge smile. "Captain's orders. We have to get Sanji to make a big feast to celebrate tonight." Zoro, after many moments of silence, sheathed his weapon. Captain's orders were resolute, no matter how much he wanted to disregard them and shred this guy to ribbons. Luffy grinned and moved towards the door. After learning about Ace, no one even dared to stop her. Once outside in the fresh evening air, Nami turned on the two with an angry shriek. It was borderline desperate. "You could have taken them. Why the hell didn't you fight, you guys?" To their surprise, Luffy only laughed. After all, both her and her brother had just been completely insulted. Not that Luffy probably understood what Bellamy had actually meant. All he did was talk big and insult us. What would fighting prove? It was hard to believe the words came from Luffy of all people. She, who was always itching for a fight, refused to fight for such a reason. Nami almost laughed. Zoro did smirk, bringing out another round of laughter from Luffy. "I can't believe you," he muttered, reaching out to ruffle her hair. She leaned eagerly into the touch, seemingly pleased with the attention. After his hand dropped to his side, she turned to him, walking backwards so she could watch him as they made their way to the ship. "You used hockey, didn't you?" Luffy asked after a few moments, still grinning like an idiot. "You knew I was gonna block your attack and you were able to stop. You're really getting better." Zoro smirked at the praise, nodding. "Only because of your stubborn training." Nami watched the two, the anger slowly slipping from her face. It was replaced with confusion and she looked between them, her thoughts turning back to her conversation with Robin. There had to be something there. There was no other explanation for how close they had become since Alabasta. She almost choked in shock when, without any hesitation or shock, Luffy grabbed Zoro's shirt and pulled him down for a kiss while continuing to walk. The two seemed to forget that Nami was there, that they were in public. "Luffy," Nami sputtered, looking more than a little aghast with Luffy's openness. Not that it wasn't cute, the captain seemed to make anything cute. Even the idiot swordsman, but they were out and about, anyone could see them. And the sound that just came from the back of Luffy's throat was definitely not meant to be heard by anyone other than, apparently, Zoro. He seemed to think the same thing and worked to pull the rubbery girl off of him. "Oi, Luffy." Luffy pouted childishly in response, releasing her grip on her first mate, but not turning away from him. "What? Now's really not the time." "Why not? There are people." "So, I haven't been able to kiss Zoro all day. Since when have you two?" Nami asked, finally managing to find her voice as they exchanged almost flirtatious banter. The two turned to her, seeming to have forgotten about her presence. Luffy opened her mouth to answer, and Nami decided she really didn't need to know. "Never mind, right now we need to focus on getting to Sky Islands." "Oh," Luffy said, looking relatively put out. "Does this mean we can't celebrate Sabo being here?" Nami gave a tired sigh. "Well, we should find out about Sky Island first." Luffy brightened instantly. "In that case we just have to go to the other side of the island and talk to the old man, Cricket, who lives there." "Happy, can we have a party now?" Luffy looked at the two expectantly, and they simply blinked back at him. The surprise was clear on both of their faces and her own expression sunk into a pout again. Clearly, they didn't believe her. "Luffy." Ace's voice floated over to them from a distant stall. He was completely alone, and after throwing the man at the stall a coin, joined them. He threw Luffy a meat kebab, and she instantly lit up. Moments later, it was completely devoured, and Luffy was licking her lips and eyeing her brother's food. "What happened to Sabo?" she questioned, not once taking her eyes off of Ace's food. Ace, despite his weakness when it came to his sister, held it protectively as he answered her question. "He's a busy guy, Luffy. He had some work to do on his ship. But he'll come meet us at the Mary later tonight," Ace explained, watching as Luffy's face fell. It wasn't hard to see just how much she missed Sabo, and he almost felt bad. Still, there was nothing he could do. The four continued on their way back to the ship, Luffy chatting happily with anyone who would listen. The three nodded along, listening patiently to the young captain. It was only when they reached the ship that Luffy ran off, surely to demand a grand feast from Sanji to celebrate. Nami followed after, ensuring that Luffy didn't get into trouble or cause a disaster. When Zoro went to follow, he was stopped by Ace's hand on his shoulder. He turned, not saying anything but tilting his head in question. "Be careful what you do for the next few days with my sister," Ace said, warning clear in his tone. It was rather obvious from the look in his eyes that he had seen what had happened in the streets earlier. "Let's just say, Sabo and I are both protective of Luffy. It doesn't matter if she can take care of herself. Sabo hasn't exactly had a good history with anyone who does anything to Luffy." What Ace had said was completely true, Zoro soon learnt. That night, with Sabo on board, the crew had sailed a ways off, just far enough that they could follow the coast in the morning, but had no chance of dealing with the other pirates in the night. The night had been filled with partying. Drinks and food all around, Luffy took enjoyment in having her brothers close by. If she wasn't clinging to one, she was hanging off the other. Zoro would be lying if he said he hadn't been jealous. Still, it was nice to see her so happy and at ease. The brothers had no qualms about sharing any of Luffy's embarrassing childhood stories. In these stories, the crew learnt that Luffy seemed to be quite the charmer. In her earlier years, she had quite the collection of admirers. Luffy refused to tell them anything about the 3 years they were gone, however. Perhaps she was worried that they would go back to the East Blue just to kill any kid she had batted her eyes at. It wasn't completely out of the question either, they discovered. Both of the brothers were protective, but to a completely different extent. Where Ace would only scare the kid shitless and then laugh it off, Sabo was entirely different. Sabo would laugh while he completely and utterly destroyed the poor kid who dared to so much as look at Luffy in the wrong way. Zoro would never, not once, admit that he was completely and utterly terrified of the prospect. Nami eyeing him as the stories were exchanged was of no help, and he simply responded by downing another glass of alcohol and laughing along with the crew. Remember, it took them a week to find the redhead. I don't think he ever did tell anyone. Serves him right though, Sabo said with a laugh, and Zoro wished very much that they could leave this topic. Quickly. It was Nami who changed the subject, catching his eye with a smirk. Zoro just knew that this was going to cost him. So Sabo, you part of the Whitebeard pirates too? Nami asked with an innocent look that seemed to send Sanji into overdrive as he danced excitedly behind her. Earlier you and Ace were talking, so I was curious. Or are you a captain? Sabo smirked, not minding the subject change. He sipped at his drink before answering. Neither. Oh, Nami asked, authentically curiously this time. Then you are. Revolutionary officer, Sabo said, his smirk only growing as the group's expressions instantly dropped into ones of shock and in some cases, horror. Number 2 of the entire organization, in fact. Chief of staff. What? You. Revolutionary. Nami muttered, almost an incoherent whisper. Then what were you saying earlier, with pops and stuff? The revolutionaries don't really refer to him like that, do they? There was no question who he was. Sabo shook his head. No way, he said with a laugh, bringing on more confused looks. But Dragon's more of a father to me than anyone else. An uncle to Ace, since he has his own father. Then, how are you? Old Uncle Dragon took him in when we were kids. It was basically official the moment Luffy claimed we were all siblings, Ace filled in with a laugh. Robin held a hand over her mouth, not surprised by this turn events and having to hide her smile when she saw the horrified looks the crew was now giving Luffy. You mean, Luffy is? Usopp and Nami muttered in unison. The sound of her name caused Luffy to stop eating for a moment and be drawn back into the conversation. What happened? She asked, oblivious to the situation. Your father is Dragon, Nami screeched, only to have Luffy tilt her head in confusion. Yeah, why does that matter? Luffy asked, genuinely curious. Nami only slouched and sighed. Really, by this point she should have expected it. First, Luffy was friends with red-haired Shanks, then his brothers were Fire Fist Ace and Revolutionary Sabo. What next, honestly? Never mind. It doesn't, she mumbled in despair, seeming to understand that to Luffy, it really didn't matter. Luffy stared at her for another minute before shrugging and turning back to her food, shoveling it in at an unbelievable rate. The crew seemed to relax after that extremely shocking reveal, falling back into their previous antics as the night went on. Luffy eventually passed out. Sabo, the victim who she had chosen, was unable to move as she nodded off against his shoulder, her body securely set in his lap. Sabo brushed her hair back with a fond smile on his face. Beside the two of them, Ace had already fallen asleep on the deck due to a narcoleptic fit. I can take watch, Sabo said with a smile. With the life of the party unconscious in Sabo's lap, the others were willing to head off to bed, the exhaustion of the long day setting in. Very soon, all but the 3 siblings had filed off to their quarters. Sabo continued to stroke Luffy's hair. The action caused her to shift in her sleep, a small smile flitting over her features. Sabo's warm, she murmured, nuzzling against his neck. So you aren't asleep, Sabo commented dryly, though he wasn't at all upset about it. He gave her his usual smile. IWs. You guys woke up. Sleep slurred her speech, causing Sabo to laugh. Maybe he should have let her have a drink. Just one wouldn't have been that bad, after all, and might help her sleep. She never did have trouble sleeping before, though. In fact, she could sleep through almost anything when she was younger. UW and leave WLU. Sabo's eyes darkened, remembering what Ace had told him earlier about how much Luffy had changed. He knew she would. His baby sister she might be, but she would change whether he liked it or not. Go back to sleep. I'll be here when you wake up. Promise. Promise. Chapter 12, Siblings and Southbirds. Trees towered over her as she ran, the smell of salt water filling her nose with each deep breath. Each footfall made little to no noise, caught by the mossy land beneath her feet, grass pushing up between bare toes. She moved quickly, a bag clutched to her chest as she ducked beneath the overhanging branches and twisted carefully between the underbrush. She finally stopped after she finally broke herself out of the forest, finding herself on a rocky cliff that meant certain death if any normal human fell from it. She carefully moved towards the edge, cautious as she peeked over. Wind whipped at her face, drawing a healthy flush into her cheeks and messing up her hair. Below her, the waves lapped against the shore, frothing and foaming. A small frown worked itself onto her face as she pushed her dark hair out of her face. Saul, she called out, her voice sure and unhesitant. The wind seemed to drown out the name the moment it had left her lips, and she tried once again, louder. There was the sound of rocks crumbling beneath her, and slowly, a figure rose from the ground. The 8-year-old stared at the giant as he brushed back his hair and turned to greet her with a large grin. His laugh echoed, lifting her heart and spirit all at once. She found herself laughing alongside him, letting the bag in her arms drop down to her feet. Robin, you did decide to show up, he said in greeting as he stretched his humongous limbs. She nodded sharply in response and stepped towards the edge of the cliff with much less caution. I stayed up most of the night. The raft is finished now. And you'll really take me to my mother? She asked, despite having already been reassured of the answer multiple times. Even so, Saul gave her the affirmative and Robin's face lit up in an expression he had seen only once before. He found himself laughing again, as he raised his hand for her to climb onto. He still had no idea how she convinced him, but Saul knew that Robin would be in danger if she remained here. For once, it would be safer for her to be with her mother. Alvia and her crew were picked up by the revolutionaries a while ago. I'm sure she is still with them. Saul gave Robin a once-over as the small human clambered onto his hand, small bag of food and clothes in hand. If the information is true, this island won't be safe for long. Robin didn't pay mind to the giant's rambling except to nod along. Finally, after so long, she could be reunited with her mother. She clutched the bag to her chest once more as she settled onto the giant's shoulder. XOX. They sailed for many days before arriving at the revolutionary ship. Instantly, they were surrounded by officers. Robin clambered away as they swarmed around, finding familiarity and comfort in Saul as they were escorted to the ship. They climbed aboard, even Saul with his monstrous size, and were given orders not to move. Saul chatted with the officers between reassurances to the small child he protected. Robin watched the interactions with interest as her fears slipped away from her. It was clear that Saul had been here before. Most of them were friendly enough, and one even brought them both some food. It wasn't until Robin's stomach growled that she realized how hungry she was and eagerly dug in. Some time passed, and eventually Robin grew comfortable enough to wander slightly from Saul. She walked around the deck, listening to the conversations around her and watching the men and women work. She drew a very curious looks when she nearly fell from the upper deck and used her ability to catch herself, but no one said anything, and even a few people smiled. It was all very interesting, she thought, to be surrounded by people that didn't regard her as a demon or a waste of space. Glancing back around, she found Saul fast asleep against the mast. Robin frowned slightly, before continuing on her travels around the ship. Somehow, she found her way inside and was soon lost inside the hallways and cabins. She turned around after finding nothing, not even a book, to sat her curiosity. Above that, was her mother not supposed to be on this ship? It was averted. A man's voice drifted through the hall and Robin found herself frozen. She was quite sure she wasn't supposed to be down here. We buried one of O'Hara's treasures, it won't easily be recovered. O'Hara is safe because they did not find it, dragon. A woman's voice joined the conversation. Robin found herself lulled by the voice, as though it were a comforting blanket placed over her shoulders. It has been studied before and will be studied again when the time comes. If you say so, the man, dragon, replied. The footsteps were growing nearer and yet Robin was still frozen in place. There are still Marines lingering in the area, it's not safe for you to return yet. There was a sadness in the woman's voice as she spoke once again. I understand the danger and have no intention of returning for a while. Robin is much better without connections to a troublesome mother such as myself. There was no answer as the pair continued to walk towards the frozen girl. Had she heard right? Was the woman speaking truly her mother? Emotions flooded through her at the thought, her heart thudding heavily in her chest as the footsteps grew closer, closer. She had never met her mother. How would she know if she was, but she had said her name. And so gently too, just as Robin had imagined it. The two rounded the corner, only to come face to face with a watery-eyed girl, no more than 10 and remarkably similar to the older women. The revolutionary and woman froze, neither speaking as the girl stared at them with shock. Hey, are you my mother? XOX. Robin quickly grew accustomed to life aboard the revolutionary ship. The smell of home could no longer be described as a giant tree and the smell of parchment and the chatter of the scholars. For 3 years, her home had been the giant ship, the smell of salt water filling her nose and the waves lulling her to sleep as she lay next to Alvia. She thought often of the scholars, wrote to them once or twice. They had been, always would be, a sort of family to her. She hadn't received any responses, but she understood why. She didn't know why this life was so dangerous, so risky, but simply accepted it as it was. It was, after all, her life. And beside her mother, she couldn't ask for anything more. Robin ran through the ship, dodging revolutionaries with ease as their greetings, warnings and laughter followed her. She had memorized each and every room, every hallway, every passage in the ship. Her favorite room was the library. As small as it was, it had books from all over the world, just like the Tree of Knowledge. Alvia and her had claimed it is almost a private place, very few people other than the two of them and Dragon tended to use it. Today, however, the library was not her goal. Instead, she soon found herself standing outside of Dragon's private quarters. She leaned against the wall, sliding down slowly into a crouch and using her ability to strategically spy into the room. She stays on this ship. Alvia all but shouted, stomping her foot as she glared evenly at Dragon, whose face remained blank and expressionless. Do you really want her to end up like Robin? You can't even say it's safe because it's family. He was my brother, and look at what they did to her. Luffy is safer with you, Dragon. Let her stay with you, let her know her father. She's not your daughter, he finally said after many moments of silence. And it is safer for her with Garp. Dragon, do you have no idea who I am? It's just like Roger's son, Alvia. If anyone finds out she's my daughter, it doesn't matter if she's Marine, pirate or revolutionary. She'll be hunted for the crime of carrying my blood. Robin heard fear in his voice. It was something she never imagined the man capable of. It was hard to believe that a man so unafraid could fear such a small thing as losing his daughter. And you're going to trust someone else to keep this secret? To protect her? Her response was as sharp as a knife, carving away his argument into nothing. She'll be found out and hunted no matter what. Let her at least know and love her father. You heard what Garp said about Roger's boy. Don't let her learn to hate her blood, her existence. Robin had heard enough. She jumped to her feet and tore off down the hall, towards the infirmary. Using a few shortcuts, it only took her mere moments to burst through the doors. The nurse inside shot her a look, before her expression softened upon realizing who it was. "Robin," the nurse said quietly. The woman shifted slightly, revealing the bundle of cloth she cradled in her arms. A bottle sat ready beside her, despite the lack of movement from the bundle. Robin moved slowly, sitting down on the bed next to the woman and peering at the cloths. Not over 3 weeks old, the baby's face had at least, in Robin's opinion, gotten slightly cuter. She had been born with a full head of hair, black strands peeking out from under the cloth even as they tried to tame them. The baby had been born with blue eyes, but now as Luffy opened her eyes, they had shifted to a chocolate brown. "Winnie, I want to hold her," Robin said instantly, holding her hands out demandingly. The woman laughed good-naturedly. "She's like my sister, right? I want to hold my sister." Winnie quietly corrected Robin's posture, instructing her on how to properly support the head, and slowly lowered Luffy into the 11-year-old's arms. Robin was not expecting her to be so heavy, but a third arm quickly appeared to help support the child. Dark brown eyes peered up at her as Robin watched the child's face. Luffy didn't cry, didn't even make a sound, but continued to watch Robin. Robin decided she was still cute despite her funny face. One day, Luffy would be even cuter. But until that day, Robin winced as Luffy scrunched up her nose and suddenly began to wail. "Hungry again," Winnie said, reaching for the bottle before attempting to take Luffy from Robin. "I want to feed her," Robin quickly said defensively, a fourth arm sprouting from Robin's shoulder. The nurse simply laughed again, handing her the bottle and instructing her on how to feed Luffy properly. Luffy fell silent the moment her lips were on the bottle, sucking it back eagerly. Robin laughed as she watched it and ignored the ache in her arm. Her little sister. Robin quite liked the idea of being a big sister. She looked up at Winnie, a pensive look on her face. "I'm her big sister, right? So I can protect her forever." Winnie smiled and laughed. "Forever is a long time, but I'm sure you'll manage." XOX. Robin sat in the library, her book propped open in her lap. It was a new one that she had not read yet. Ivankov had brought it back from the North Blue. It was a fairy tale, not her usual point of interest when it came to books, but it was something new all the same. 15 years old and she had already left behind childhood. That was, perhaps, a side effect of growing up on a ship that constantly went up against the world government. Still, she wouldn't trade her new life for anything. The danger was worth it, be surrounded by people she could call friends, family even. Her mother, Dragon, who had become a father to her, and Robin, Oni-chan. "Hello, Luffy." Robin looked up from her book, smiling when she saw the 3-year-old running towards her through the library. Luffy had turned into an adorable child, with white eyes and a head full of hair. Unfortunately, she also proved to be rather adventurous, you could say. She rarely stayed in one place for long, and was always finding her way into trouble. The girl reached the couch Robin sat on and heaved herself up onto it, instantly curling up close to her. Robin didn't doubt the girl was attempting to hide from the poor revolutionary officer or nurse that had volunteered to play babysitter for the day. "Where Mama? She's in a meeting with Dad and Auntie," Robin reminded her gently. Luffy pouted a whole minute before she became distracted with the book in Robin's hands, most likely drawn to it by the brightly illustrated drawings. "What you reading?" Luffy asked, peeking over her shoulder curiously. "A fairy tale. Auntie Eva brought it back from the North Blue." Luffy's eyes lit up at the very prospect. It was rare to catch Robin reading something that she would be interested in, and she knew it. "Read it to me," Luffy demanded, pointing to the book. Robin gave the girl a look, and she instantly amended, "Please, Oni-chan." Robin chuckled, a small smile slipping back onto her face as she flipped the pages back to the beginning. Over 400 years ago, in a certain country in the northern seas. Robin read the story, her voice soft and careful. Perhaps it was not her literature of choice, but she enjoyed reading it with Luffy beside her. The girl would stop her to look at the pictures, or make her repeat certain pages. At one point, Luffy got personally offended and more than a little worked up when Noland was accused of lying. Robin had to calm her down before continuing, only to have to start all over again at Luffy's command. Robin had what seemed like never-ending patience for the child, and started over. This time, by the end of the story, Luffy had drifted off to sleep, snuggled close to her big sister. Robin smiled softly, setting the fairy tale aside and reaching for another book. She was barely a few pages in when Winnie burst into the room. The poor woman looked frayed, her usually pulled back blonde hair ruffled and she was covered in paint, for whatever reason. Probably had something to do with the sleeping child that was currently napping against Robin's arm. Her eyes seemed dull and tired when she spotted the two of them. She had large, Luffy-induced rings beneath her eyes, and she moved for the couch with sluggish movement. "I have no idea how you do it," the nurse said, rubbing her eyes and letting out a sigh. Robin shifted her arm, and Winnie leaned over to pick up the small child. The girl let out a whine of protest in her sleep, before making herself comfortable against Winnie's shoulder. "Not even for Alvia and Dragon." The teenager chuckled, flipping open her book once more and picking up where she left off. "I'm her sister, remember? XOX. It will be a long process. At the very least, you may be a part of the operation for 2 years. Are you sure, Robin?" Robin glanced up at the speaker, her adoptive father and head of the Revolutionary Arm. Robin straightened slightly under the man's watch. "But if I succeed, the knowledge of a Poneglyph may be recovered?" she asked. She already knew the answer along with the dangers the mission possessed. Danger was nothing new to her. Since she was 16, she had volunteered herself for countless missions that she was perfect for. Trained by those upon the ship and back at the headquarters, she had become one of the most well-respected officers among the army. "Yes, but Crocodile, we can't be 100% sure of his motives," Dragon said after many moments. Robin had no doubt that this might just be the most dangerous situation she ever put herself in. Alvia, standing near Dragon, didn't look all too pleased with the idea, but also knew that this was Robin's choice to make. "I understand the risks involved," Robin said, in such a way that confirmed that she would indeed be accepting the seemingly impossible task. She had never spent so long away from her mother since they had been reunited, but she did not hesitate. Being able to read whatever was on the Poneglyph in Alabasta, it could only bring her closer to discovering the true history. Robin knew that this was the reason Dragon had come to her with this job. Alvia or any of her former crew, now revolutionaries, would be more than capable of taking it, after all. Dragon gave her one of his rare smiles. "Perhaps you'll be seeing Luffy on the seas sometime during the mission. She plans on setting sail in the next year or two, I believe. Or so Sabo told us." Robin smiled in return, her thoughts returning to the girl with a certain fondness. Robin had got caught up in the work involved with being a revolutionary after turning 16. Luffy had begun to spend summers with her grandpa. As sad as it made her, Robin had been cut out of 4-year-old Luffy's life as they took separate paths that never seemed to meet. She wondered if Luffy remembered her. Probably not. "I look forward to seeing her again." Robin awoke with a start, her heart thudding heavily. The memories of the dream flashed before her vision and blinking didn't seem to help. It was odd. Never before had she had such a vivid, solid dream. Dreams were tangible, blurred around the edges with no rhyme or reason, but this was as though she were remembering something that happened long ago. It was impossible though. Nothing, no matter what world she had landed herself in, could have changed that much. Robin was intelligent. From the moment she had woken up in this familiar but new world, it was obvious. This body did not belong to her. It was foreign, untouchable, and something she could not understand. From the way her lips turned up as though she were used to smiling, the way scars no longer marred her body from her close encounters with death, to the way her body craved familiarity, friendship and the warmth of family, things she had never allowed herself to dream of in her body did not belong to her. This body was not hers. The dream haunted her as she prepared for the day, once again borrowing some of Nami's clothes before making her way on deck. The timeline may be different in this strange world, but there was no way. Her mother and Saul being alive was nothing more than a fantasy, she knew. She didn't allow herself to entertain the thought. They had died on that cursed, wretched day. When fire rained from the sky, angrily devouring everything it came in contact with, destroying everything she knew, everything she loved. She made her way to the galley slowly, running her fingers along the railings of the Mary as she thought. Not all of it was out of the question, however. If this world had indeed had different plans for her, she may have ended up with the Revolutionary Army. During her 2 years aboard the ship, she had no doubt in her that Dragon would not turn her away. After all, he had taken in a weak and badly injured Sabo. If nothing else, it would give reasoning to a different past. But why would her mother appear in her dream? Her own selfish fantasies, perhaps. She barely processed anything even as she entered the room and took a seat at the table. Beside her, Sabo and Nami hovered above a map, talking about navigation enthusiastically. "And that's Ohara, where Robin and her mother are from," Sabo said, pointing to a small island. "I've heard of it," Nami said, sounding rather excited. "Robin, you were from such an amazing place and never said anything." Robin had frozen upon hearing the words from Sabo's mouth, and couldn't bring herself to answer Nami's statement. Ohara got wiped from the map the next year. It was impossible, there was no way. Ohara wasn't destroyed in a Buster Call. The scholars lived on. But how? Sabo grinned when Robin didn't respond, and instead poured a cup of coffee and forced it into Robin's hand. She accepted it numbly, the smell of the expensive West Blue brew hitting her nose as she inhaled slowly. It was probably one of the only things she missed from her time with the revolutionaries, and was now almost comforting as she willed herself to calm down. Robin hasn't been back in ages. She and her mother joined up with the revolutionaries when Dad busted Alvia from a marine ship. Guess she's chosen a new path now though. I can't believe she's sailing under her little sister. Nami laughed along with Sabo, the atmosphere becoming light as the two of them went back to their cheerful chatting. Taking her cup of coffee, Robin left the galley as quickly as she had come, fighting her racing heart and scattered thoughts. Was it possible? Was what she had seen earlier memories? She didn't want to allow herself to believe such things, dreaming and letting her hopes get to her. But Sabo had said, it made sense. If it was true, she owed everything and more to Dragon. Sabo. Robin was dragged from her thoughts at Luffy's shout. The girl seemed to have just woken up, and was currently looking around wildly for the brother that disappeared while she was sleeping. Robin found herself smiling as the girl began to pout when Sabo was not within immediate sight or reach. He's inside with Ace. The captain instantly brightened, making a run for the galley before suddenly coming to a screeching stop. She seemed to back up until she was just in front of Robin, staring at her face with a look of concentration and a pout. What's wrong, Luffy? Are you okay? The question took her off guard. Luffy, despite caring dearly about each of her nakama, rarely dared to actually approach them. She usually waited for them to speak up about their problems if they had any, rather than try to draw answers out of them. I'm fine, just confused, Robin admitted, after many moments of avoiding the question and Luffy's gaze. Luffy seemed to falter at that. She could cheer people up, but Robin was confused and she was the smart one. What could Luffy do to help her? Do you have her memories? Luffy looked confused. Memories. Luffy pondered for a moment before nodding. Luffy is still in here, I hear her voice sometimes. When she wants me to see stuff, I get her memories but I don't really know why. My willpower wasn't enough to snuff her out. I see, Robin said, sounding slightly put out. Perhaps that was in. Her own will had erased the other Robin, leaving only traces of her memory within her subconscious mind. But if that were true, then what she had seen earlier. I'm gonna go see Sabo and Ace. She didn't really register Luffy taking off into the galley, too caught in her own thoughts. She felt a lightness spread through her body at the very idea. Her mother was alive, at Dragon's side, living out her dream as she searched for the true history. Saul had not been affected by the Buster Call that had never happened. While she didn't know his fate, she knew that he was alive. She felt a wetness at the edge of her eyes, before the floodgates seemed to open and she allowed the tears to pour down her face. The coffee fell through her fingers, the glass shattering against the deck. She paid it no heed, bringing her hand up to feel the tears that wet her face. She was envious of herself in this world. What she would give to have the life that this Robin lived. All the same, she couldn't help but be happy. It seemed that at least in this world, she did not have to suffer the endless pain and cruelty of the world. And that was enough for her. Darashishi, Darashishi. Robin laughed, the sound truly honest and sincere as she laughed and cried without any reserves. Darashishi. This is the house of the guy who is your key to getting to Sky Island. Ace asked, looking just as doubtful as Sabo as they stared at the giant facade. Robin smiled, remembering with fondness the first time she was here. It has to be, Robin said, watching as Luffy eagerly flung herself over the railing. He's the only one who lives out this way, after all. Both brothers looked fairly doubtful, but they helped Doc the Merry and soon joined their sister in her search for Mont Blanc cricket. The group found their separate ways around, Luffy walking straight into the house with Ace behind her. Sabo stayed behind, distracted by the book sitting on a table outside. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands before calling out to Robin, "Hey! Isn't this the book you used to read Luffy as a kid?" Robin glanced up, the memory from earlier flickering through her mind. She smiled, moving closer and taking the book from Sabo and flipping through it. Nostalgia that wasn't completely her own, but perhaps a learned reaction, rushed over her. Liar Noland, she read aloud, drawing the attention of the other crew members. Sanji looked rather excited at seeing the picture book, revealing he was born in the North Blue and grew up with the story. Nami looked curious, taking the book and beginning to read it. A story over 400 years ago. Nami began, in a certain country in the northern seas. There was a man named Mont Blanc Noland. Noland the explorer's stories were always grand adventures that sounded like lies. But the people of the village could never tell if they were true or not. One time, Noland went on an expedition, and came back to report to the king. "I saw a mountain of gold on an island across the great seas." To see for himself, the brave king took 2,000 warriors and crossed the great seas in his ship. He fought powerful storms and huge sea monsters. Finally, the king, Noland, and 100 soldiers landed on the island. But what they found there was nothing but was sentenced to death for his lies. These were his last words. That's it. The mountain of gold sank into the ocean. The king and the others were shocked. Nobody believed Noland anymore, but he never stopped lying until he was dead. Nami looked up after finishing the book, sadly at Usopp before adding, "And so he died, without ever becoming a brave warrior of the sea." "Oi, why are you looking at me?" Usopp exclaimed, looking rather offended by Nami's addition to the story. "And why did you add an ending like that?" Before she could answer, there was a loud splash from the water. There was a moment of panic as everyone realized what had happened, and instantly the first mate and revolutionary officer were at the coast. Both dived without any hesitation, paying no heed to the man that had suddenly climbed out of the water. It didn't take Zoro long to locate his captain, even within the murky depths, and he was soon dragging the anchor to the surface. Sabo was already out of the water when he resurfaced, a limp Ace lying next to him on the coast. The chestnut Asen pulled me and so I grabbed Ace. Luffy said, coughing up water as she frowned. I didn't expect him to get pulled down with me. Ace didn't look all too impressed, but he took a deep breath and willed himself to not set his sister on fire. Sabo just rolled his eyes, leaning over the edge and hauling the captain out of the water. You're a moron, you know, he muttered, knocking her teasingly in the head before extending a hand to help Zoro out of the water. Luffy laughed it off, before the four of them were quickly brought to the real world by the sound of bullets. They were on their feet instantly, but it seemed they didn't have to worry. Whatever caused the man to fall down sick happened to strike at just the right time. After helping the rather odd man out, his two sons, nearly attacking them but quickly befriending Luffy, and listening to the story about Cricket's history, the Straw Hats knew there was no way they could convince their captain not to head to Sky Island. The thought of the process, however, was just as daunting and frightful. Usopp and Nami refused to be consoled by Robin and Luffy's reassurances. It was only when, surprisingly, Sabo stepped up and held out a piece of paper. I'm sure you guys have nothing to worry about. Gall D. Roger got to the island all right, Sabo said, ignoring the way Ace flinched behind him. He held out the paper to Nami, who took it with a frown. Dad said the map might come in handy if you guys are around Jaya. Nami unfolded the paper, staring blankly at it for a few moments before processing the map. This is Sky Island. Skypia. Luffy popped up behind her, peeking over her shoulder. See, Nami. It's so cool. We have to go. Cricket watched the group with amusement as they bickered amongst themselves, arguing over the existence of the island and the danger the trip possessed. The group was eventually moved inside as night fell, the entire room full with people, food, and excited chatter. With 2 days until the knock upstream, they would begin repairing the ship the next morning. Throughout the party, Robin remained off to the side, flipping idly through Nolan's logbook as she reveled in the nostalgia. These were the days when they lived much more carefree, before the weights of their actions were put on their shoulders. She loved her crew, and she loved their adventures, the chaos of everyday life. At the same time, she missed this simplicity. So much had changed after 2 years apart, and she knew life would never be like this for the group again. Her eyes found her captain, wondering what exactly the girl had planned. It was clear that no one else had been sent back like they had, and neither had any idea why exactly they had been pulled back in such a way. At least, Robin shook her head. Luffy was on her execution platform. There was nothing she could have done that would have ended them back up here, right? The gold is in the eye of the skull. She was drawn from her thoughts by the man's drunken words. Cricket crouched over her, looking at the logbook in her hand, which she had reached the final page of. That was the last thing he wrote on the tear-stained page. He was executed that day. Robin smiled at him, her own small reassurance that she believed him. But the truth was not to be revealed yet. Apparently, Luffy didn't agree. Eye of the skull, Luffy said, scratching her nose as she looked at the man. She had even paused in her eating. Cricket nodded. Who knows what the fool was talking about? You say that monstrous current is really strong, right? What if it knocked the city of gold up into the sky instead of sinking it? Luffy's words caused everything to fall silent around her, and her crew gaped at her. What was she even suggesting? Had those words really come out of her mouth? Luffy paid no heed to the multitudes of eyes on her, and picked at her nose as she continued. This Jaya place looks kinda like a skull's mouth, doesn't it? What if the rest of the skull got knocked up and that's why you haven't been able to find anything? Because it never sank, it just got knocked up onto that mystery cloud you mentioned. Nami was the first to recover, pulling out the map that Sabo had given her, along with a map of Jaya she had recovered. She quickly lined them up, looking even more puzzled when it worked. Luffy was right. The two together really did look like a skull, glaring at them from tattered paper. Ace and Sabo were staring at their sister with confused looks on their face, and it was no wonder. She had never been the brains of any operation in this. It was impossible, but yet. Luffy grinned. So I'll go up in the sky and ring the bell for you, okay? Then you don't have to fight with this Nolan guy anymore. The next morning, while the three men got started on the ship, the crew got sent off to search for the odd-looking creature known as the South Bird. With no clue how to find it other than the knowledge of its weird call, the 8 pirates and 1 revolutionary set off to catch the bird that would ensure their trip to Skypia. With 3 nets to catch the birds, they quickly divided into groups and set off to find the creature. Nami, Sanji and Usopp took off first, Nami practically dragging the coward behind her. Robin offered to accompany Chopper, who willingly went off with her, although he dragged Zoro along. This left the 3 siblings to go off hunting alone, although it turned into more of a friendly walk. Ace was watching his sister carefully as she bounced around, chattering excitedly about her adventures. She told them, as they listened patiently, about how she had bribed Zoro to join her crew, enlisted Nami as a navigator and later saved her from Arlong, defeated the Kuro pirate scum who had threatened Usopp, managed to catch herself the best cook ever, fought an awful king to help Chopper, and saved Robin's life after Crocodile's defeat. Sabo looked more than a little worried as she told him about Robin but didn't say anything. She was, after all, just as much a sister to him as Luffy was, despite lacking a childhood of bonding time. Thinking of brothers, Sabo turned and grinned at Ace, whose smile quickly slipped off of his face, looking at his brother with a worried expression. I haven't had the chance to ask. How's your boyfriend? Sabo asked. Last time I visited, Pineapple couldn't even kiss you without you going up in flames. Literally. Ace's smirk faltered at the word, a heat spreading across his cheeks in a way Luffy had never seen before. Nay, Ace, your face is all red. Are you sick? Shut up. Ace snapped, and Luffy looked taken aback for a whole moment before recovering. She burst into laughter when she realized what exactly was happening to Ace. Ace is blushing. I said, shut up. You still haven't answered my question, Sabo teased, glancing back at Ace. You know, you're lucky. He's just about the only person that might be able to put up with you. What, with setting everything aflame on the regular? Anyone who dates you needs some freakish healing ability. Ace scowled. I haven't spoken to him since I left. He said he won't talk to me until I come back. Oh, the drama. At least I'm not too chicken to tell him how I feel. You can't even tell the girl you love her. Sabo fell silent almost instantly, his face turning more grim, more serious, than Luffy dared to recall. You know it's not that easy, Ace. Because of her past, yada yada, Ace muttered, giving his brother a half glare. Koala has more balls than most pirates on this sea. She can handle it. Ace rolled his eyes, before batting his eyelashes childishly. Besides, she's totally into you. I hate you sometimes. As if I haven't heard that one before. But the point still stands. You're stuck dreaming about a girl you'll never confess to, and I'm the one with Marco, who is really winning here. Sabo glared at his brother, giving him a hard push on the shoulder. You know, your devil fruit suits you. Not only are you a hot-headed bastard with a fiery temper, but you're also positively flaming. I'll have you know. Ace let out a huff, crossing his arms and just about to continue his sentence when. Look, Ace, Sabo, it's a Miyama beetle. Luffy bounded up to them, a collection of creepy crawlies trapped within her rubbery grasp. She held them up, beaming widely. She hadn't even heard a word of their conversation. Go figure. You haven't changed a bit, they both muttered in a deadpan unison, watching as she released the bugs and the creatures quickly made their escape. The captain scowled and went off searching for some more, peeking beneath rocks and pulling up stumps. The two brothers followed, occasionally bickering as they made sure Luffy didn't get too lost within the forest. I found a Hercules beetle. Come check it out. The two brothers entertained her, letting her poke at it with a stick she had found. The beetle quickly grew agitated, crawling off before it faced further torment at the hands of the ability user and her weapon of choice. It reminded Ace of the swordsman, with his bad temper and how easily he got annoyed at Luffy's poking and prodding. The thought caused him to grin as they continued walking. Hey, remember when Luffy used to just adore anyone who'd give her food? Follow them around and practically crush on them. Ace laughed as Sabo's expression darkened protectively. Well, they only had a day left with the Straw Hat crew. Might as well make it last. She used to be so easily won over. I feel as though her taste has sharpened a bit. The hint was small, and seemed to fly right over the revolutionary's head. I don't know. That cook seems like a pretty suspicious character, Sabo started, his thoughts of the flirtatious cook quite obvious in his expression. Ace had to stifle laughter as the man silently fumed, clenching his fists. Luffy wandered over, seemingly taking interest in their conversation for the first time. She was probably drawn in by the words, cook, more than anything though. Luffy's more of a first-come, first-served person, don't you think? Sanji was the fourth to join. First mates are important, Sabo said, missing yet another hint and changing the subject in one go. Luffy, realizing they were not talking about food, went back to hunting beetles. She seemed to have entirely forgotten the intention of their mission, or simply didn't care. She chose one with a good, strong dream. Not sure how I feel about that Usopp kid though. You don't think she's, with Usopp? I mean, Ace had to laugh this time. It was just impossible not to. Usopp, with Luffy, I feel like he's not her type. She's probably more into the hard-headed, sometimes violent kind of person. Sabo frowned as he thought, but didn't seem to pull up any answers. After many moments of thoughtful silence, he turned to Ace. Do you think she's into girls? I mean, you're right. Do she and Nami? This time, Ace simply gave up with an irritated sigh. Clearly, nothing he could say would make it click in Sabo's head. Protective, he might be, but that didn't mean he wasn't slow on the general uptake of the subject. The ship was over half complete when the three groups found each other again and returned to the house. Robin, in a multitude of arms, held a wildly thrashing and angry bird that refused to calm down, whilst Luffy stood calmly with a south bird upon her shoulder. "You're a show-off, you know that, right?" Usopp muttered, looking covered in hives, and maybe a few spider bites. Chopper quickly ran to patch him up, along with Nami and Sanji, who didn't seem to have fared much better. Robin simply smiled, releasing the pissy bird. It quickly disappeared in the depths of the forest whilst Luffy's nuzzled her cheek. Her two brothers, both having had wasp nests dropped only them while not paying attention, shot the unscathed girl a hard glare. She only smiled at them and pet the awkwardly seated bird, who made an unusual cooing noise. After the majority of the crew were patched up, they quickly set to work on fixing up the ship. With 12 people working on it, it was quickly repaired enough to set sail for Skypia the next day. The crew was cheerful as they celebrated into the late night, eventually drifting off as they dreamed about what awaited them above the clouds. The three siblings stayed up, reveling in each other's presence. After all, the seas were dangerous in these moments. They wouldn't always be able to have them. Luffy knew this more than either of them, having lost Sabo, then Ace, and then losing Sabo again. She visibly shuddered when she remembered her execution, reminding herself that it was not just her nakama whose bodies littered the ground, but her friends and family as well. "I'm gonna go get some fresh air," Luffy said as quickly as the thoughts rose in her mind, not wanting to draw her brother's attention too much. It seemed to work well enough, and Sabo watched her leave as Ace dropped off due to a narcoleptic fit. She stepped outside, breathing in the cool, salty air that caused her to relax almost immediately. The south bird caught at her as she wandered towards the shore, before landing softly on her shoulder. She smiled and laughed, stroking the bird's beak before climbing onto the Mary, now decorated as though it were a chicken. Easily, she clambered onto the Mary and laid down, facing the starry sky. The south bird gave a squawk of protest before settling on one of the ears and watching the pirate captain. "Mary," Luffy spoke, her voice soft and unheard over the lapping waves. "I'm glad I got to see you again. It was really hard to say goodbye." Luffy took a deep breath, running small circles over the wood, remembering when Ace used to comfort her in the same way. "I tried to take care of you better this time. I didn't break off the mast to fight Laboon. And I won't jump on the octopus and deflate it." "I know." Luffy forced herself to breath again. She knew she wasn't just talking to Mary, but all of her nakama. She had failed them all the first time. Still, there were some things you can't change. "I know it hasn't helped that much. But, maybe you can make it to Frankie, and he can take care of you better. Give you a better goodbye. But you need to hold out until Water 7, okay?" There was silence, where nothing could be heard except the calming waves and gentle breeze. After a few moments, the sounds of footsteps echoed across the deck of the Going Mary. The presence was familiar, but not one of her crew or her brothers. Luffy scowled. "Go away, Ayum, I'm not in the mood," Luffy snapped. The footsteps came to a halt, but the presence didn't disappear. Luffy's scowl faded slightly as she hoisted herself up, but nothing could prepare her for what she saw. She was nothing more than a child really, her entire as shimmery and yet solid as Ayum was. But she wasn't Ayum. No, this girl was dressed in a sailor suit with a hammer in hand. One look, and Luffy understood. This girl was no stranger, despite the fact she had never seen her before. Not in this form, at least. Mary. The girl gave her captain a shy smile as the pirate slipped from the figurehead to the deck, landing on her butt. The expression was beyond shocked, even disbelieving. "Hello, Captain." The small girl stepped forward, dropping down in front of the downed captain, smiling all the while. It was a sad smile, but one full of love. Luffy wasn't quite sure if she was really seeing this all, or if it was a bad dream. Then Mary reached out and touched Luffy's face, and it came crashing down on the pirate that this was very, very real. Mary's hand, cold against her cheek, was surprisingly solid despite the ship's shimmery state of being. "It's okay, you know. Robin told me about everything." The spirit of their ship laughed. Robin might not be happy that she had exposed this secret, but she didn't pay it any heed. The woman who was usually so strong and silent, talking to a ship, but Mary had listened, loved hearing the adventures and tales, even about Sunny. "I'm glad that I could sail with you. You guys are my family, and I will make the voyage again and again, for all of you." Without thinking, Luffy pulled the spirit into a tight embrace, letting the tears fall freely as she apologized, and then apologized again. The captain snotted and bawled, muttering apologies and thank yous between the sniffles. Through it, Mary simply held onto her captain like a lifeline, whispering small reassurances. Mary understood the captain was not crying about her, not completely. She was crying about everything she had been put through up until this point. The pain of losing everyone, of being given a new chance, and with it, the fear of failing. Her captain was scared. Scared of the future and what awaited her, of what would become of her crew after Ayum claimed her. And Mary could do nothing but hold her and give her this small comfort. There was the sound of cruel laughter, and Luffy found her arms empty without any warning. She stared at her lap, before wiping the wetness from her face. The laughter sounded again and she looked up, only to come face to face with none other than Bellamy. Not so big and powerful now, are you? Bellamy taunted, and his crew echoed with laughter behind him. It was destined to happen, that he'd just use you and leave you to fend for yourself. That's what they're all like. And now what are you going to do? Helpless and weak, filled with useless dreams and an impossible goal. And now you're alone, left for dead. Luffy's eyes narrowed on Bellamy, although she didn't understand half of what he was saying. No one had left her, after all. With his attitude, it was easy enough to remember that this was not the Bellamy she befriended in Dressrosa, but she was still taken off guard when he suddenly moved forward, grabbing the rubber pirate's hands. See, I came to take that old fool's gold, but you know. Why not two birds with one stone? Bellamy asked, and Luffy scowled at the man. His grip on her was almost nothing, but she didn't want to start any fights. Not on Mary, where the ship could get damaged after finally getting fixed up. I'll make you a deal. Since that idiot left you, and you clearly have no protection, I'll let you join me. We can protect you, unlike your useless crew. Might as well kill them. They won't be any use. You can take the ship and come with us. Join his crew. He hadn't mentioned anything like that the first time. What had changed in this timeline so much? It really couldn't be because she was, well, a girl. Could it? Wait, kill her crew. She knew they couldn't possibly, but the thought sent anger coursing through her. Get the hell off of my ship, she spat, the words dripping with venom as she gave him a deadly glare. The pirate took a step back, and his crew didn't hesitate to scurry off of the small deck. Only Bellamy and Sarkis stayed. When they didn't move, she repeated herself, this time louder and angrier. Luffy, is everything alright? She could swear she saw the entire crew, including the captain and first mate, go pale upon hearing the two men call out to their sister. The two blinked wearily as they adjusted to the darkness, before processing what was going on. The two were at her side in an instant, but she gave them a steady glare. Stop it, I can take care of myself, you two, she told them, before pulling her hands out of Bellamy's grip with an easy tug. It was obvious how much it shocked him that she was able to do that. He wasn't the only one horrified either. She could feel their eyes on her as she stood slowly, her straw hat shading her eyes, and she took a deep breath. Her body shuddered once, still racking from the tears she had shed with Mary. When she finally looked up, even Ace and Sabo were taken aback by the glare, along with the power rolling off of her in waves. I said, get off of my ship. If you want a fight, you can have one. Just not where my ship will be hurt. Bellamy looked shocked for a moment, before straightening. He glanced at Ace and Sabo, who glared back. When I beat you. Luffy followed his eyes and let out a huff. They know how to stay out of someone else's fight. You threatened my nakama and it is my job to defend them. And the old man's treasure. Luffy scoffed. He's my friend as well. I won't let you take his important treasure. Bellamy hopped off of the ship, followed by Sarkis and her brothers. They, in any other situation, would have destroyed this punk already, but as it was. If what Luffy said was true, she was simply defending her nakama. They could not step into this fight. Of course, they didn't have to either. As soon as they had stepped off the ship, and the threat of harming Mary was gone, Luffy had no hesitation. Bellamy had leapt forward, completely intent upon taking her out, only to be down and out with a single punch. While his crew urged him to stand, they eventually fell silent. Sarkis was the exception. Bellamy, stand up. You can't be taken down like this. What happened to Bellamy the hyena? The big-time rookie. You couldn't be taken down by someone's pet. That's all she is. Get up, Bellamy. Ace and Sabo had become disinterested, until they heard Sarkis' desperate words. Both of them turned at the same time, sending Sarkis a glare that would cause even a New World pirate to at least shit themselves. Sarkis paled beneath the look, while Luffy only looked confused. Ace, Sabo, what's he talking about? She muttered, tilting her head. She got no reply. Instead, she turned back to the collapsed body of Bellamy, crouching down and poking at it hesitantly. His head was half lodged within the dirt, something she doubted would go unnoticed by her crew the next day. She hoped she didn't hit him too hard. After all, with Luffy out of the way, he really wasn't all that bad. Right now, he was still a mindless puppet. She reached out, grabbing his collar and hauling him out of the mini crater. Oi, you, she snapped at Sarkis, who jumped at the directness. Take him and fix him up. I don't think I hit him too hard. She threw the unconscious man at his first mate, watching as the man stumbled backwards beneath his sudden weight. Without her having to say another word, he was stumbling away, the loyal crew on his heels as they hastily returned to their ship. I'll never understand you, Sabo muttered, sighing before turning around. While he was well aware that Luffy could take care of herself, and she really could, she had handled the situation perfectly, he still worried. The scene he had walked into hadn't helped in the slightest. Luffy only grinned and laughed, following her brothers back into the small house. The three soon ended up passed out together, Luffy firmly grasping Ace and Sabo's hands within hers as she slept. The next afternoon was a rush of preparing for the knock upstream. They had exhausted more of their supplies than they had originally planned when they had partied through the night, and needed to restock. It wasn't all that difficult, although Luffy constantly drifted away from her duties to rejoin her brothers. This was her last day with them, the day they parted ways. She wasn't ready for them to leave and begged more than once for them to tag along to Skypia. She was rejected each and every time. She still tried though, knowing well enough that this might be the last time she sees Ace before him fell down. She knew she could save Ace this time, perhaps even avoid the war altogether, but that wouldn't stop her constant worrying. What if Blackbeard chose to kill him on the spot? There were too many possibilities, too many things that could go wrong. She didn't want to think about it. When the time finally came to say goodbye to her brothers, she was more than tearful. She was openly bawling, clinging onto her brothers in a last-minute, desperate attempt to get them to come along. They simply slapped her rubbery limbs away, and offered up 2 pieces of paper. One had a small A on it, and the other a small S. She silently pocketed them with a promise to meet again soon. Then they were off in the dangerous waters, heading towards the whirlpool that could very well be their end or one of their biggest adventures. Ace and Sabo watched them go, watched the ship grow smaller and smaller. They didn't stick around long after the current took them into the sky, instead turning and walking along the shore towards the town where Sabo's ship was still docked. Somewhere along the way, Ace revealed Luffy's relationship to Sabo, who, should he have the devil fruit Ace was cursed with, would have turned into a pillar of angry flames. As it was, all he could do was let out frustrated noises as he threw a mini hissy fit. Eventually, Ace calmed him down and they returned to their silence. When Sabo spoke up once more, it was laced with concern. He knew, from the moment he had met up with Ace and Luffy, that something was off, but he also knew it was not something Ace would discuss in front of their sister. "What's wrong, Ace?" Ace didn't answer for a long time, before looking up at the sky with an almost lost look in his eyes. "I told you I was chasing Blackbeard because he killed a crewmate." "Thatch, right?" Sabo asked, looking a bit puzzled. Ace nodded. "He's alive, or, I hope he still is. His condition was pretty bad last time I saw him. For some reason, Marco seemed to know it was going to happen. He was there when Teach attacked Thatch, he saved him, and he said. Marco said, I hoped this time would be different." Ace took a deep breath, shuddering slightly as he remembered it. "He's been having dreams," he claims. "But his attitude, he's been more protective than usual." "More." Ace let out a frustrated sigh. "Yes, more. Of both Pops and I. He managed to save Thatch and tried to keep me from going after Teach. Teach nearly killed him, Sabo. You can't kill a phoenix and yet." "Calm down," Sabo urged, not wanting his brother to get overly worked up. "What else?" Ace glanced at Sabo. "I couldn't help but notice. The way he worries, his reaction to seeing me and Pops, the way he acts and talks. It's exactly the same way Luffy has been these last few weeks." Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Once in a Lifetime by Alcoholic Introvert. The end.